All right, so just a quick reminder, please sit at tables that have file folders at them, because we're going to be doing a little bit of group teamwork as the time goes on, not right away, but it will be coming. So I want to thank Robin for inviting me in the Texas conference also. You got to be at a table with the file folders. Yeah.
Just take your stuff and move over there.
Yeah. So this training is actually called, it's a 10 steps training for starting healthy churches. We do this, we've been doing this for quite a while. I'm going to give you a very quick review of what happened. I was using this process to plant churches, and I moved next to the General Conference to plant a church there. I was given name of someone named Jerson Santos, never heard of him before in my life. They said, he likes a church plant, you should see if you can get him on your core team. So I started recruiting him, and he's like asking me more questions than I was asking him, which I thought was really weird. I found out that he's actually promoting church planting around the world. So he told me I need to start teaching these things, not just using them myself, which I never really thought too much about. And so he started taking me to different places. We began to use this in different places around the world, refining the process, and we've had some good success with it. But I just want to start out with more of the why do we church plant. I think, thankfully, the evangelism group is here too, because church planting is evangelism. My role at the Potomac Conference is I am the Director of Evangelism and Church Planting. I'm trying to change the name to Multiplication Director, because church planting is multiplication, evangelism is multiplication, and discipleship is multiplication. So we're working on that. But one of the things that I really believe, and I think you believe this too, is that the Adventist church has been called, hasn't it? We have something we're called to do. Now, some of you have heard me say these things before, but I'm repeating them for those who haven't been at boot camp or such. But one of the things that I really find interesting is that we have this incredible church, and we have a mission from God to do something very special. And I just want to make sure that we're actually staying on mission. I want to make sure that there's nothing that we're doing that opposes God's will. And I believe that we are chosen for this time. Do you believe that? Amen. I really believe that we are chosen for this time, that God has called us to do something incredible. And as I looked in the Bible, though, I saw that there's a lot of chosen people, right? There's a lot of people that were chosen for specific missions. They were God's chosen. And I go all the way back to the very beginning, right? Who was chosen at the very first? Adam and Eve, right? They were chosen. They were given a mission. What was their mission? Yeah, be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion over the world, right? And so they had this pathway that God gave them, to follow this pathway. But he said, the one thing you don't do, what was that? Yeah, drink coffee. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Don't go down that path. You know, everything is yours, just stay off that path. And what did they do? That's exactly where they went, right? They decided they were going to do their own thing. And how did that work out for them?
Not so well.
Not so very good. Not good at all. In fact, that sense of rebellion immediately went into their offspring, right? They have two sons, and one of them, God says, I'm going to put you back on the right path. I'm going to show you how to do a system of worship, of sacrifices. And Abel said, I want to do what God said. But what did Cain want to do? He wanted to do his own thing, right? He was all right with worshiping as long as it was the way he wanted to do it. He didn't want to follow God's path. He wanted to do it his own way. And how did that work out? Not very good at all, right? He gets so mad, he ends up killing his brother and being ostracized from his family. But certainly when God chooses an entire nation, a nation of people to be his, things will be different, right? He chooses a nation and he grows them. They come to escape starvation in Egypt, and their numbers swell so great, in fact, that the Egyptians freak out. These guys are going to align with our enemies, and they're going to overthrow this government. They're going to wipe us out. So they put them in slavery, and God's people begin to cry out, and God heard their cries. And he leads them. He leads them out of slavery. And he says, I'm going to lead you on a path towards a land flowing with what?
Milk and honey.
Milk and honey.
Okay.
And he leads them. He leads them with a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. He even leads them through a sea that parts right before them. Leads them through rivers. Feeds them the whole way. Absolutely amazing. And they get to the edge of the land. And when they get there, God says, I want you to send some spies into this land, proving I really believe, it doesn't say exactly, but I believe he wants them to see that he wasn't joking. This is an amazing land. So the spies go in and they come back. Was God telling the truth? Yeah, fruitful land, right? Carrying, 2 people having to carry these grapes. Amazing. And so God's people follow God's plan and go right into the land, right?
Yeah, right. Wish.
No. 10 of the spies say, we can't follow God's path. Paraphrasing here. We can't follow God's path. The people in there are so big, they're going to squash us like bugs. So they decide to do things their own way. How did that work out for them? Not good, right? For 40 years, they had to wander around till the entire generation dies out. And finally, after that, God leads them back on the path that he chose for them. And how many battering rams did it take? How many massive missile projectiles did they have to send at the walls to tear down those walls? None. They just had to worship. March around and worship. And the walls came tumbling down. See, God had promised them that he would give them that land. And that's exactly what he did. Now, thankfully, right, God's chosen people, they learned their lesson. They're never going to make that mistake again, right?
No.
Well, you see, God was like a theocracy is what they were under. God was their king. You know that they didn't have a chosen king. They had the judges, as you read in the Old Testament. But the people began to look around, and they said, wait a minute. They have a king sitting on a throne. Wait, so do they. So do they. So do they. Everybody has a king. We want to be like them. We don't want to be different. We want to be like everybody else. And God isn't one who forces his way on people. So eventually he relented and let them choose human kings. And how did that work out? Not very good, right? Most of them lead the people far away from God into idolatry and horrible things. Now, of course, they learned by now, right? They would learn, these chosen people. Yeah, they were worshiping. Eventually, this beautiful temple was built. And they would come to the temple for sacrifices weekly, annually, for the different festivals. And you would see that they were there waiting for the promised one, right? You know that all of the temple points towards who? Everything points towards Jesus. When you do a study of the temple, it all points to him, to what God was bringing, the promised one. And guess what happened? One beautiful night, Jesus was born. And God's people rushed out to meet him, right? How many of God's chosen people were rushing out? It was strangers, right? Magi from a foreign land who come in and say, where's the newborn king? reading the same books, the same Torah, the same scriptures. And Isaiah, that the prophecies, they knew that the Messiah would be born. They saw the star. And so they come up expecting God's chosen people to know where the king is. Where's the newborn king? And how did God's chosen people react? They're dumbfounded, right? They had no idea what they were talking about. They had to go back and look up these scriptures that they quote all the time to try and figure out, what are these guys talking about? But praise God, he was born. And then Jesus chose another group. He chose a group of 12, these great disciples, these apostles we call them. And he walked with them, right? He ate with them. They slept on the same hard rocks. He did miracles in front of them. He showed them what it was like to be a servant king. Absolutely powerful. The way that Jesus served people, touched people, healed people, helped people. Amazing. And then, what does his disciples do? Do they humble themselves as well? No. They begin to fight amongst each other. Who's going to be the greatest in your kingdom? Can we sit at your right hand? Can we sit at your left hand? They were looking at all of this in an earthly context. They wanted power, prestige, position. They weren't thinking about being the greatest by being the least. They weren't thinking about being first by being the servant of all. They just wanted to be first. Even when you have Jesus himself helping teach chosen people, they still have this kind of reaction. And Jesus told them about another path. If you read the book of Matthew, you'll see that he actually told his disciples time after time about this path. He told them that he was going to die. He told them about the path to Calvary. That he was going to die, and in 3 days he would be raised again. And the soldiers came at night. How many of the disciples were cheering and excited? I mean, this is the night. The plan is taking place. Praise God. Is that what happened? What's up, man? Good to see you, brother. No, that's not what happened at all. You didn't have the people. In fact, they fled, right? They were afraid. And when they led Jesus up that hill, were his disciples there on their knees thanking him for the sacrifice he was making? No, they weren't there. How about 3 days later? Certainly, the disciples were anxiously at the stone, waiting for it to be rolled away, right? He laid out the path. He told them what was going to happen. And when the women came to tell that Jesus had been risen, they didn't even believe him then. They had to go see for themselves that the tomb was empty. Because that path didn't fit with what they wanted to think, the way that they wanted to see the world. God's path sometimes doesn't jive with our path. And we choose our own path time and time again. But praise God, and I want to hear an amen for this, Jesus rose again. Amen. Amen. And then he chose another group, a new church, and he gave us another path, right? And he said to them, when he was raising the early church, he said, I've got a pathway I want you to follow. Wait for the Holy Spirit to come upon you. And when it does, I want you to take this message to where? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, all over the world, right? It was a great commission, a great pathway. Did the Holy Spirit come? Yes or no? Yes. Absolutely. With power, the early rain flooded upon the disciples. And they began to speak the word of God, inspired by the Spirit, and thousands were baptized. And thousands more were baptized. And thousands more were baptized. It was absolutely amazing. And so then they rushed out and spread the good news around the world, right? That's not what happened. You see that they did not begin to leave until Acts 8. They stayed in Jerusalem. They did not spread the message as they were told to. Now, I'm sure that they had good reason, right? I mean, they had thousands of people in their congregation now. We're mega church pastors now. You know, we really have so much going on locally. You know, we got to worry about what we got now, not worry about sending. Focus on what we have here. And God had to bring a persecution on his own church just to get them back on the pathway that he chose for them.
Oh, mercy.
Now we come to another chosen group at the end of time. The Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let me ask you a question. Is there any possibility that we could have fallen into the same trap as all the other chosen groups have?
Never.
Are we so arrogant as to believe that we could not make that same mistake? Is it possible that we're traveling our own path instead of God's path today? And what happens if we do that to the mission that God gave us? Just like others, it binds up the mission. We're not nearly as effective as we're called to be. If that happens, I'm not certain that happened. Well, actually I am. I want to share with you a quote here from Ellen White, and we can just stop right here. It says, upon how many?
All.
Upon all who believe, God has placed the burden of raising up churches.
Amen.
I'm just going to tell you real quick. You'll see it in a second. Raising up churches is how they said church planting. That's the language they used when they were talking about church planting. So how many people here believe in God? All right, would you be included in the all?
Yep.
Would it be every administrator? Are they part of all? Every pastor?
Yep.
Every member?
Yep.
Every elder?
Yep.
Absolutely. All actually means all. That we're all have this burden placed upon us to plant churches, to raise up new churches. Now, I'm going to go into a touchy area. Most of you, I'm assuming, are ordained, or many of you know at least ordained pastors. What if I told you that the founders of our church would not ordain most of the pastors in North America today? They would not qualify.
Oh, wow.
This is what James White tells us. This is from 1862. In no way can a preacher so well prove himself as in what? Entering new fields. And here we go. If he be successful in raising up churches, church planting, and establishing them so that they bear good fruits, he gives to his brethren the best proofs that he is sent of the Lord. That's pretty straightforward, right? But it gets much more intense. If they cannot plant churches, raise up churches, then certainly the cause of truth has what? No need of them. And they have the best reasons. They have the best reasons for concluding that they made a sad mistake when they thought that God called them to teach the third angel's message. This was what our church was. This is exactly what God gave us. And I don't have time in this short of a seminar to go through all the evidence. You can look it up yourself. You can look at things that Jay and Andrew said, Ellen White said. So many of our founders talked about God gave us a pathway. He gave us a message, right? And praise God, we kept the message. We have the message still. But we decided to go our own way on the method. Kept God's message and using really the world's methods. Can I be honest with you today?
Yes, sir.
You know what method we're really using? The beast's method. The beast. This was given to us, handed down by the Roman Catholic Church. When Constantine came in, he didn't just change the Sabbath. He changed so many different things, including how the church reached out to people. They became centrist, introspective, instead of reaching out to people. And that's exactly what was passed down to Protestant churches. And when Ellen White, James White, the other founders, when they began to pray about an organization, they didn't want to be organized, but God revealed to them the real way that He wanted the church to grow. Not to be pastor-centered, not to be organizational-centered, but to be pushing forward, always multiplying, always looking for ways to reach the world. But something happened. As the churches were growing massively, quickly, using God's pathway, His message, and His method, some of the churches began to look around. And they said, wait a minute, this church over here, they have a pastor hovering over them. And wait a minute, that church over there, the Methodists, the Catholics, the Baptists, the Congregationalists, they all get pastors to help them, to hover over them. We want to be like them. And Ellen White heard people saying these things. And so she says this. She says, there should not be a call to have settled pastors over our churches. Wait a minute, what did that say? There should not be a call to have settled pastors over our churches, but let the life-giving power of the truth impress the individual members to act, leading them, who? The members, leading them to labor interestedly to carry on efficient missionary work in each locality. The church does not look today like God designed it.
Wow. That's for sure.
When did it change? Well, we can look back in history and find very clearly when it changed. When Ellen White died. When Ellen White died, everything changed. She was there to help protect God's message and God's method. But when she died, churches began to complain again that we wanted settled pastors. We want church people to hover over us, to help us. We need them. We want to be like everybody else. And just like the children of Israel, God relented and let us do our own thing, take our own path. And now every church has to have a pastor. Half-time, quarter-time, but you have to have a pastor. In reality, today's pastors are really, are you listening? They're really paid elders. We're paying a bunch of elders. And let's be honest, for some pastors, really they're just highly paid, well, kind of highly paid, babysitters. Because this whole system breaks down when we become pastor-centered. Because now elders can no longer grow to become what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be the missionary leaders of that region. Now they make sure that the platform is scheduled correctly. Deacons, who are supposed to be social justice agents, are making sure that the toilets are flushing right. I'm serious. What happens when God's chosen people decide to go on their own path instead of God's path?
Wow.
Tragic.
It always impacts the mission. But if you look at certain countries, they never got off the path.
Amen.
When I go into countries like Brazil, I get to teach there every year. It's phenomenal what I see happening there.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, I love Brazil. Man, I love Brazil. Last time I was there, I was in a town of 100,000 people speaking at a church plant just outside of Brasilia. This church plant was the 7th new church plant in this town in the last 4 years. They now have 21 churches in this town of 100,000 people.
Wow.
And what did we do after church? Every single person went door to door after church.
Wow.
Not giving out Ellen White books because that freaks people out. Let's be honest. They were giving out books about health for your family. Living as a healthy family, how to do that. They said, we're here to serve you. We walked into bars and people cried.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
You can see when God's message and method are being followed.
Amen.
That's why the Brazilians are going to run the GC soon. Because they're exploding. If you go there, it is phenomenal what is happening there.
Amen.
They're growing like crazy. Parts of Africa growing like crazy. Inter-American countries growing like crazy. Because church planting is normal. Because they're following both God's message and God's method.
Amen.
And so they're thriving. And yet we bring in some of these amazing immigrants that come into our country, and so often they start drinking our Kool-Aid. And they start doing the North American style of church, which again isn't really our style. We like to pretend it's Adventist style. It's not, it's the Catholic style. It is how the Catholics organize. And then the Protestants organized after that. And once Ellen White died, we organized after them. This is from A.G. Daniels. It says this in 1912. For when we cease our forward movement work and begin to settle over our churches, to stay by them, and do their thinking and praying and their work that is to be done, then our churches will begin to weaken and lose their life and spirit and become paralyzed and fossilized, and our work will be open retreat. This is reality. If it wasn't for the immigrant growth in North America, the Adventist church would be on the decline. This is reality. When we accept the world's methods of doing church instead of what God clearly gave to this church, this is what happens. The Adventist church, the way God designed it, is uniquely designed for organic multiplication. It's designed to explode and grow. And it happens naturally when we follow His methods. And we're seeing this around the world. We're seeing this everywhere. It's amazing. But sadly, we've twisted this God-given system. Even the tithing. Do you understand where the tithing principle, obviously from the Bible, how we used to do it? Tithing was used totally different back in the day. You see, a church planter came into a town. They raised up some leaders, trained them to run the church, and left. And those leaders ran the church, and they sent the tithe to the pastor so he could plant more churches. But he would go to another town, and then these churches would be sending tithe. But I don't know if you know this, but back then they did not have cell phones or Facebook or WhatsApp. And it was very hard for them to keep track of where the pastors were going. If the pastors got sick and died, or they moved to a different place, Or they moved to, they just didn't know where they were. So people began to ask the leaders of our church, what do we do with the tithe? Because they knew what it was for. It was for multiplying the work of God through church planting and then circuit rider evangelism. And so that's when God gave us a system. The tithe would come into a storehouse, and there, the storehouse or conference would keep track of all of the church planters. And they would make sure that every area was strategically we were going into. But can we be honest? Is it okay to be honest? Uh-huh. I know I'm being filmed. I say this all over the world. What this tithe has done now in many parts of the world is really just a bureaucratic machinery now. Yes. We're not using it like God called us to use it to push multiplication into every corner of our nations. It's time to get back on God's path. Amen. And stop trying to do things our way. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to follow Jesus' command to go make disciples of all nations? Because even discipleship is impacted when we don't plant. Because if you do create a wonderful discipleship process in your church, they're never going to raise to the level that God intended them to raise. Because the pastors are hovering and settling over their churches, doing the work that the members are supposed to do. And what if you raise all these great leaders? What are they going to do when there's too many leaders and no work left? Because you're not planting churches. Discipleship naturally occurs when we plant. Amen. It happens absolutely naturally because we have churches now that we're moving people out, so there's new places for people to grow in their leadership. Yep. And then those that leave are always taking on new responsibilities and stretching their ministry wings. Yep. And you see growth in so many different ways when we follow God's plan of multiplication instead of our own. Leaders need to learn to start replacing themselves. Leaders have to, if you're a leader, not just a pastor title, but if you are a pastor leader, your call is not to hover and babysit. Your call is to equip and release.
Thank you. Yes.
And honestly release. In our churches, we put a big poster up day one. The answer is yes, exclamation point. And that means if there is anything that fits in the vision of reaching this community that you feel God's calling you to do, the answer is yes. Amen. You don't go to a board to ask. Do it. Yep. You go to a board only to say, I need your help. Can you help me? Yes. Instead of the board pushing their thumb down on people.
Yes. Yes. Amen. Yes. Amen.
I remember I went on vacation in one of my church plants. I don't know how old we were, a couple months old. I came back, and somebody started talking to me about the prayer meeting, and I was like, well, that's interesting. We don't have a prayer meeting. And like, oh no, this guy, he started a prayer meeting at his house. And I celebrated. Yes. He never talked to me once. He never said a word. I mean, why would I ever say no to a prayer meeting? Praise God. And it was the most powerful prayer meeting I've ever been to in my life. Amen. We had people traveling 45, 50 minutes away to go to that prayer meeting because God was answering prayer all the time in that place. We had 2 people who were in hospice care given weeks to live. When that prayer meeting team met around them, they both walked out healed. God's power works when people follow His message and His method. And you'll see miracles all the time. All the time. Multiplication capacity. Members need to learn to reach out and find new members. Develop relationships. We call it evangelism, but it's really relationships. It's getting out there, connecting with people. Members are discipled, and they're supposed to lead the church and make new disciples. And then churches then send these leaders to plant new churches. It's a very simple cycle. It's God's plan. It's biblical. It's in the book of Acts. So the question I have for you today is, will we return to his path? Are you willing to say, you know what? I'm going to follow God's path. Now, I'm not saying tomorrow just ditch your churches. That's not what I'm saying at all. That'd be ridiculous. That's not following any good organized plan. But begin to equip your members to lead. And if you're not a planter, so what? Train them to be a planter then.
Amen.
But we have to stop counting baptisms and start counting how many people we're sending out into the mission field. What is your sending capacity? That's much more important than how many people you're baptizing. Because if you can send, you're going to baptize way more people. It'll be natural. It'll happen. So you have to ask yourself, and I don't know what the answer is, what is your capacity to multiply? I know everywhere I go, I'm always the roadblock. I am always the roadblock. As a leader, you are the roadblock. Because there's only so much you can do. So the only way that your multiplication capacity can increase is if you train others to do what you do, no matter what your role is. And so when I go into a church and now in conference work, the first thing I do is I find 7 to 9 people that I can invest heavily in, so I can teach them everything I know. And I've been trying to get conference executives, presidents to do the same thing. I remember being in a conference and saying, "What's your plan when somebody leaves?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, aren't you training people to be ready to step up?" And conference after conference, like, what? But in the business world, and I praise God, I had a business experience before a church experience.
Yeah.
In the business world, you don't even think about not doing that. Because your whole system's going to crumble if you're not preparing the business correctly. You got to do the same thing at every level in the church. And you got to ask yourself, what is my capacity to multiply? Your capacity always increases exponentially when you train others to do what you do. So why do we plant? We plant because this is God's design. Both in the book of Acts, in the writings of Ellen White, throughout the history of our church, it is clear the design of this church is to plant churches. We plant because this is our calling. We're called to spread the good news to all nations. We plant because this is also the most effective, not the only, but the most effective form of evangelism. You'll see this time and time again when you get involved in church planting. You would think that there was a church that I did that we had, can't remember, maybe 18, 19 baptisms. That's okay, right? That's decent. Yet we had 170 people coming to our church. And all the churches around us were growing at the same time. If we hadn't planted those 170 people, all those other churches wouldn't have grown by that much. Every time you plant, you see this growth happening.
Yep. Amen.
It is absolutely amazing. And we plant because it's the most effective way to build leaders as well. So by the way, every presentation that you see on here is on this website, cpexchange.net. It's not the best website in the world. A very nice guy at the GC built it for us, but it's not super user-friendly. But we download everything we do. All my stuff's on there, and many other church planters. Churchplanterexchange.net, cpexchange.net. You just register. It's free. We don't want to, we're not trying to get money. You have to put your email address in there. We do that so that robots don't attack us with a bunch of ads and stuff in there. But this is on there. There's so much other stuff on there too. So I want to go through this 10 steps training with you. And you have a whole bunch of handouts in a packet. You see that packet there? All right. So the handouts include And any of you who are in the back, if you want some handouts, let me know. We've got more. The handouts include quite a few things. One of the things is this very first thing, the 10 steps to launching healthy new churches. This is the 10 steps in a shortened version. So you can use this as kind of a reference sheet. It gives you an idea of how we use church planting and the steps that we take. We try and stay according to the Spirit of Prophecy, the book of Acts, and a lot of experience in how we've done it. So I want to go over real quickly this 10 steps, and these are the 10 steps over the next 2 days that we're going to detail for you. But let's go quickly. First is understand your community. The very first thing we are called to do is plant churches for others, not for ourselves. Please, don't just plant Adventist churches for Adventists. That's not multiplying. We're planting Adventist churches for people who don't know Jesus or don't know our message yet. And so you've got to understand the people you're reaching. So we spend time in the community learning about their needs and who they are. Then we develop a system of core values. We'll talk about that today in detail. Core values are basically what is the DNA of this church plant? What makes us unique for this community? Then know your goals for members. This is vital. Listen, if you're here and you're not ever going to church plant, number 3 is still going to be gold for you. Because this is a discipleship pathway. Actually designing a discipleship pathway. Number 4, the not fun one but important one, creating proposals. Number 5, start interviewing people. Do you hear that word, interviewing? Yeah. Start interviewing people to be on your core team. Yeah. We'll explain why that's vital. Number 6, you begin to train your core team so that they can become what you want them to be before you start the church. Number 7, start building impact ministries. Before you ever begin to have services, you start having ministries. We'll explain how that works. Number 8 is how you triple the size of your church plant before you ever open the doors, a 5-month pre-launch process. Number 9 is doing a grand opening totally different than what you've seen normal church plants do. It's a way to capture all of those people who get interested in a grand opening. And then number 10, do it all over again. A plan for multiplication. So these are the 10 steps that we are going to go over together during these 10 days. We're going to take some time going over each one of these in great detail for you. I will tell you that this 10 steps process, we have been testing this now since Gerson Santos geniusly told me to share this with others. We've been testing this around the world with great results. The first time I did it, I was in Greater New York Conference. First church we launched with 200 young adults. Opening service, 200. We did this in Sofia, Bulgaria, which is one of the most difficult places in the world to reach. You think that the Catholic Church is tough. Try the Orthodox Church in some of those European countries. They have a stranglehold on religion. In that country, you can't plant a church without their permission. You're an Adventist, you have to ask the Orthodox Church, can I plant a church? And it's against the law for companies and businesses and schools and others to rent to a non-Orthodox church. I mean, the odds are astronomical that you'll be successful. We went through this process. I coached them for a year through this process. They had a grand opening of 125 people in that country. It's just amazing when we follow these principles. And please don't think that I am some genius. What I did is I made a ton of mistakes. I made so many mistakes. And the only thing I pat myself on the back a little bit for is when I make a mistake, I analyze it and figure out what could I have done differently. And so all the stupid things I've done in my ministry, you get the benefit of seeing, what I should have done instead. And so first time I tried this process, we launched with 217 people a young adult church that all the leaders said would never happen, that it couldn't happen. So this process actually works. We've been using it in Brazil. We've been using it in the DR, and of course many places in North America as well. So we're really excited. I'm just using it with a Chinese church right now. It's amazing watching this guy, fresh out of seminary, knows nothing about how to do church in North America. He's doing a Chinese plant in an area that's super wealthy, and he has over 400 contacts already. Just phenomenal. Just following the process. It works very, very well. So this is just a sample timeline to give you a little idea of how long it takes to plant a church. These are cumulative, so add this plus that. So the first month to month and a half, I usually do the first 4 steps. If you're new, this could take you up to 5 months. That's okay. The problem we have is conferences rush church plants, and then they wonder why they're failing. It's because they're not built right. Another 2 to 4 months building the team. Another 5 to 7 months working on the ministries and training the team. And then do your first service in step 9. So this whole thing could take anywhere from 10 months to 18 months. There's no, thank you so much. There's no specific right length of time to build a church. The best thing to do is just follow the process. And you can tweak this if you want. I don't care. It's not like there hasn't been a successful church plants done before I wrote this. I mean, there's tons of successful models out there. But the only thing I tell people, if they want to tweak things, know why. Not because you think it's better. You should know it's better. If you want to do something different because you have a good evidence that this will work instead, then do that. I encourage you to do that. Step 10 is the multiplication. After 3 months of launching, we do our first evangelistic reaping series. We've been doing an evangelism cycle throughout this process here. We launch small groups as soon as that ends. And 1 to 4 years after our grand opening, we're launching our next church out of our church. So we plant pregnant. You'll hear that term quite a bit. Yeah?
Do you have questions now or later?
You can ask real quick, yeah.
How, in your opinion, how many members should a healthy church start with a core team?
Yeah.
How many members should a core team have?
We have a step that talks about that, but I will tell you there's no right answer to that one. If you're in a small town, it's going to be less people. If you're in a metropolis, if you're looking at a certain small group of people, there's no easy way to answer that. I shoot for 50 core, 50, but I tell people usually 30 because they do what you just did. 50? First time I tried this, I had a core team. I built a core team of 77 people.
Repeat the question real quick just for the recording, just so
What?
we know what you're talking about. So
Oh.
people on the core team.
Yeah, he was asking how many people should have in the core team. All right. So the first time I tried this, I didn't know what I was doing either. I just had developed a system, and I thought I'd give it a shot. We ended up with 77 on our core team. And I knew 0 people when I got into that town. So it really does work. And we'll.
Are they all Adventists?
No. You don't want all Adventists. Why would you want all Adventists? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Gotta get rid of some of them, right?
Yeah. You got to have some Adventists, but yeah. But you don't have to. Remember, how many Adventists were here when the missionaries came into Texas? There were no Adventists. Every time a missionary goes anywhere, there's usually no Adventists helping them. They're going in and building up, just like we did when we started the church in North America. And I honestly wanted to be a missionary. I never thought about being a church planter. My calling is to be a missionary. I felt it. I was looking at taking a call to go to Nepal, to Israel, to different places. I was looking at different places, and as I was studying what it took to be a great missionary, I kept hearing over and over, you train the locals and then let them take over because they will connect better with people from their own culture. And then just hit me. I think God spoke to me and said, doofus, Okay, God doesn't call me doofus, but I do. You are local. You are a local. You know the culture in certain areas in North America. Why don't you just stay here and be a missionary here? And so that's when I began this pathway. Does that make sense? All right, we're going to jump into very first step. Step 1. Are you ready? All right, let me set my clock here or I will get long-winded. All right. So very first step. And you have a handout for this one. It's called Understanding Your Community. And step 1 is really all about getting to know your community. Getting to know the place that you want to plant in. Now, this is assuming maybe you already know where you want to plant. If you don't know where you want to plant, that might be good to do some demographic research, talk to your conference about a strategic location. But most planters I've talked to, when they come to this type of training, they already have an idea of where they'd like to go. But I find that most church plants forget this vital first step. You have to focus on the harvest. If you are planting for yourself, why are you doing it? Don't do it. It's just a waste of energy. We don't need to transplant an old culture from one neighborhood into a different kind of neighborhood. It doesn't work. It doesn't translate well. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and it does, but rarely does it work. So our first section brings us to the harvest. And Jesus tells us this. He said to them, the harvest is truly great, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So in this conference, how are you guys doing? I don't know. I'm asking. Are we sending out laborers into the harvest?
Some.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming some. Do you know what your church per population ratio is? You probably know that. What do you know what it is here in this conference?
Okay,
He knows everything.
Yeah.
per member, it's like 300 and whatever, but for church, we have 330 churches for 24 million population, so it's...
Yeah.
Slim.
That's a little bit better than we're doing, though. Yeah. Yeah, we're at 182 for. No, I'm in D.C. now. I moved to Potomac Conference. Yeah. Yep. All right. So. All right. Now you probably know this, that the problem we have in a lot of Adventism is most Adventists have no close friendships outside the church. Most Adventists don't try to make new friends outside the church. And our church's ministries focus primarily on the already saved versus the lost that Jesus sought. That's just reality. This doesn't wow anybody, right? You know this. This is our current reality. Now, is there any Spanish church pastors in here? Okay. So maybe that's not the same reality with them. I don't know. I don't know how it is in Texas. In some conferences, the Spanish work is expanding quickly and it's harvest focused. The members are involved. And in some conferences, the Spanish work is dormant and growing as slow as the rest of North America. So it's really up to the conference usually that makes that difference. But anyway, these are things that we need to begin to see changed. And your church plants can change this. And all you have to do is just do what Jesus did. Right? You know the very famous, one of my favorite quotes of all time. You could probably recite this in your sleep, I'm assuming, right? Christ's method alone. Can you say alone? Alone. Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior did a 28-part Bible study with the people. Isn't that his first step? Oh, no. The Savior mingled with people as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he invited them, follow me. So this process is the same thing that we're using here. Step 1, get out there and get to know the people. Mingle. I never plant a church unless I've done at least 400 interviews with people in the street. And I'm not talking about surveys with the clipboard. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just a general quick conversation. If you come at somebody with a clipboard, what do you do when somebody comes at you with a clipboard? Yeah, don't be that guy, please. That is so silly. You memorize 3 questions. How many people can memorize 3 questions? You think you can do that? First question, what are the greatest needs of our community? Not hard, right? Second question, do you know anybody meeting those needs right now? Third question, if they're engaged, would you like to partner with us to meet those needs? Boom, boom, boom. But when I'm doing the surveys, I'm not trying to recruit, but sometimes recruiting happens. This church that I told you about in Sofia, Bulgaria, they told me there's no way in the world they would do those surveys. They said people would yell at them. Most people are either atheist or Orthodox. Anything that's Christian that's not one of those 2 things is considered a cult. And there's no way that people would talk to them. And I finally just had to say, listen, coaching ends if you don't go try. We won't coach anymore. It'll be done. And I said, set up a video camera on the street and pretend you're doing filming interviews, whatever you have to do to make yourself feel comfortable. But go out there and do it. And so they said, okay, we'll try and get 10 in 2 weeks. We'll see if we can actually talk to 10 people. And I said, I don't care if it takes you 200 people to get 10 interviews. Go out there and make it happen. Called them back in 2 weeks, big smiles on their faces. And I was like, why? What happened? Something good? We talked to 112 people. 112 people. And they had, I can't remember what it was like 13 of them or 11 of them, I don't remember. Just over 10 of them said they want to join the church already.
Amen.
Just from those simple 3 questions.
Awesome.
We don't try and recruit with them. We're trying to learn. We're trying to understand our community. And that's what this first step is all about. Once you understand the harvest, then you can meet their needs. But if you don't understand the people, then you're only meeting your needs. You'll create evangelism the way that you like to do it, based on things that you did in the past that you thought were fun or successful. You won't actually create something for that community if you don't know that community. Imagine if Jesus Christ did ministry like some of our church plants do. You know, blind Bartimaeus comes up to Jesus. You know, after screaming, "Have mercy on me," he comes up to Jesus. And what is the question that Jesus asked Bartimaeus? Yeah, what do you want me to do for you, right? What do you need? And he said, I want to receive my sight. What if Jesus acted like us? What if he said, hey, Thomas, come here. Hang on, Bartimaeus. Come here, Thomas. Bring that water. Bartimaeus, I know you can't see this, so I'll tell you what's going on. I'm taking this water. Here, smell that. It's water, right? Now it's wine, Bartimaeus. Taste that. Bartimaeus tastes it. It's good. All right, you have a great day. And Jesus takes off. He performed a miracle for Bartimaeus. Isn't that great? Just happened to be the wrong miracle, right?
That situation, yeah.
You know, Jesus wants to do the miracle he feels like doing. So many of our churches do ministries and things for communities because it's what we like doing. It's not what that community actually wanted or needed. It may be, number 99 on their list of needs. And then we wonder, why is nobody coming to us? Why isn't anybody responding to this? It's because we're planting churches for ourselves instead of the people. So that's why it's so important. Step 1, understand the community before you plant it. And so if you look at that handout I've given you, there is it's a sheet called Understanding a New Community. There's 9 different ways to get to know your community. Now, listen, you don't have to use all 9, but always use the first one. Ask questions. I almost wish I didn't call it surveys, but it's 9 S's and I couldn't figure out another word. So But basically, you're just asking simple questions. Maybe that's what I call it, simple questions. Why did I think of that? All right, so this will be changed soon. But it's simple questions. What are the greatest needs in our community? And this is how I deal with it. I walk up to somebody and say, listen, we're starting a brand new ministry in this community for the community. We want to help the people here. But I'm new here. I don't know the needs. What do you think are the biggest needs of this community? And sometimes people say, I don't know. Or sometimes people say, leave me alone. But most of the time, people give you some answer. Sometimes it's dumb. You know, I've had a lady tell me, we really need more speed bumps in the streets because these teenagers are driving their cars so fast. Yeah, I mean, it was the greatest need in her mind. So, yeah, I'm going to build a church off that ministry. Creating speed bumps. We would be really popular, wouldn't we?
Some of the no churches that are based.
Yeah, exactly. So what we want to do is ask those questions, and then we find out who in the community are meeting those needs, because maybe those needs are already being met. I will tell you, almost everywhere you go, somebody will say, they'll have people tell you homeless. It's like the go-to catchphrase. Homeless, 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 homeless. Even like when I planted a church in Laurel, Maryland, there was, you know how many women were homeless in that entire region? 0. You know how many men were homeless in that entire region? 13. Because 9 different churches had created this ministry that totally brought people off the street and into homes and into the workplace. It was awesome. It was amazing. I loved it. And we still had people saying the number one issue is homelessness. The only people who were homeless were because they wanted to be homeless. They did not want to be part of the program. They refused to help. And they all lived in the same place, right by a racetrack in tents. You know, like one of those dog racetracks, or I can't remember his horse, I don't know. Anyway, so you have to understand the community before you begin planting a church. So we have something for you here. Well, first, any questions on understanding community? It's 3 simple questions, not hard. You know, do at least 200 interviews before you start getting your ideas. Oh, and by the way, don't ask leading questions. You know, if somebody says, I don't know, well, what do you think about health? Because you're really just leading it towards what you want to hear. Oh, yeah, we need health, of course. Don't do that. That's not how you get good statistics. And don't try and make up your mind before you do all the interviews. So what I do is I create a very simple Google Doc on my phone. I ask somebody questions, get their responses. When they're out of sight, I begin typing in my Google Doc, whatever they answered. And then I leave it. I go ask another person. Once I've asked a huge portion of people, then I begin compiling the results so that I don't begin steering it one way or the other. Oh, it looks like it's going to be this. Oh, it looks like it's going to be that. That's human nature, yeah. Whatever works in your community, but yeah. Door to door works fine. You know what I love? I love laundromats because people are stuck. They can't go anywhere. They're not going to run away from you because they're stuck there for an hour. So I saw a hand over here somewhere. Yes.
I was going to say, we're doing a health fair. Is there, a place where we could ask that at the health fair? Or
always,
set
yeah.
up a video, like, hey, go talk to that video.
Whatever you want, yeah.
No, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yes.
I have lots of thoughts, but I'll ask this. You said laundromat. There's got to be some care, I would assume, taken in. People that go to laundromat are of a certain demographic.
Yeah, you're right. Very good. Do you hear what he said? He said you got to be careful not just hitting one demographic. If you go to laundromats, make sure you're going to a wealthier area as well. I do a lot of grocery stores. I do a lot of parks. I do a lot of business regions. I try and hit a vibe. But again, I'm planting for a small community. So if I'm planting in a poorer community, but some of the communities I planted in have no laundromats at all.
But
Yeah.
and I'm not negating the fact
Right.
that it's a good thing to go out and talk to people, but it's not unreasonable. Well, we have the survey that you get before you start a church plan, so that will tell you something about your neighborhood. There are, just by driving through the neighborhood, you can already see that there are certain things that
Right.
are needed, and you can still launch ministries that are felt need seminars without doing all this legwork. I'm not saying you shouldn't do the legwork, that's better, but you can go ahead and do stuff, because there are things that you can already assume about a neighborhood. Like healthcare. I mean, you start looking at the politicians that are going on right now. What are they talking about? Just listen to your local politician. Whatever they're talking about is what the felt need of the community.
It's actually some of the surveys I do is with politicians, police officers, teachers, fire department, business leaders. So yeah, you want to hit all those. And the survey isn't just random people on the street. You could be targeting surveys too. Yeah, but very good point, very good point, yeah. All right. And I thought I saw one more question somewhere. No? All right, so what we want to do is, I want you to, everyone has in your folder a thing that says Planting Team Alpha or Planting Team Omega on it. So it should be, it says step 1, understanding your community. Planting Team Alpha or it's stapled. Pull that out if you have it there. Okay, so every table is a team, unless you swapped the things around, which I hope you didn't. So you guys are Omega or Alpha? Omega. Everybody Omega here? All right. You're all Alphas. You're all Omegas. You're all Alpha. Okay, good. Everybody got that right? Good. All right, so what we're going to do is, we're going to go through, each of you have a different scenario on your form. You're going to be given 9 minutes to go through this one page, just this first page, not the rest of it. You're going to go through, read this to each other, and you're going to see the questions, and then there's some group discussion questions. You have 9 minutes to go through that and answer those questions, and we'll get back to you. Go ahead.
Individually or together?
You can do it together, it's probably easier. All right, so what I need is a volunteer from this table, a volunteer from this table, a volunteer from this table. You guys paying attention? And a volunteer from this table. Okay, who's the volunteer over here? Huh? Okay, Mark's the volunteer. You pick the person who reports. Mark, you pick the person who reports. Who's the volunteer over here? You pick the person who reports. Who's the volunteer over here? You pick the person who reports. Who's the volunteer over here? Okay. Who is it? All right, you pick the person who reports. All right, who did you pick?
To report, meaning
Yeah.
to write something down?
No, to talk right now.
They all twisted my.
No, you got to pick somebody now.
Jose. Jose.
No, pick somebody, quick.
Yeah, Jose. Jose.
Okay. All right, Jose. Real quick. Are you Alpha or Omega?
Alpha.
And answer question number 1. What seems to be the greatest need in this community?
It seems to be teen programs, keeping the teens involved. If you cluster pretty much everything under 59, it really revolves around the teens. The teens, there is a teen issue in the community. And somehow to try to reach them, a program where whatever it is, if it is after school tutoring and or also add some Pathfinder activities, does not have to be Pathfinders, but something that would definitely keep them involved, keep them doing stuff, not only games, but also helping them actually try to reach
Okay,
out
you're
to the-
answering more than question 1.
Oh,
I just want to know question 1. But thank you.
Wanted to lump it all
Good
together.
job. All right, who did you pick?
Bye-bye.
Okay, so question number 1. Tell us what your team is.
All about action here.
Okay, so this is for question 1?
Yes.
Team Omega.
Okay, what's the answer?
For us, we felt that it was family impact
Okay.
because we see that not only is it really targeting just teens here, but we see that a lot of these issues has to do with the family in general.
Right.
And so we felt that really moving forward with this envision, figuring out some way to incorporate the entire family structure
Good.
into bringing them together.
Excellent. All right. Who did you pick?
Right here.
Tony. All right. So what's your team?
Well, we decided on homelessness.
Homelessness is your number one. Your team Alpha?
Team Alpha, yeah.
Okay. Why did you choose homelessness?
Maybe because of the answers here. Is there anyone
Okay.
who know many of these needs, so we're really at the
Yeah, but that's probably the reason we chose the.
Yeah. So did you notice that there's a lot of organizations already meeting that need? If you kept reading through, you saw that there's a lot of organizations. Not that it's bad. I'm just saying that it's actually a trick question for Team Alpha. Because there's actually a lot of work going on for homelessness and not for the other things. So that's why this team over this Team Alpha picked, instead of homelessness, what did you guys pick again? Teens. So that will happen when you're going through the data. Is also you notice that if you add the numbers, not just pick the top number, but add the numbers, you'll see that there's several issues in there that have teen connections. Yeah, does that make sense? Yes. So that's a way to trip you up a little bit, because we want you to be tripped up now rather than later. Okay, Team Omega.
Use this microphone, please.
Who did you pick?
I was going.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
That was Dean Waterman. The greatest need, obviously, is family related.
Yeah.
Disjointedness.
Yeah.
Could you use that word?
Yeah, family issues. Yeah, anything. Yeah, exactly. So you can see that when you're doing surveys, this is very good practice, because you're not going to get the same answer from every person, even if it's the same subject.
And how does that
You know, some people will see maybe teen
feel
issues
really good
here
about that answer.
and different teen issues here, but they'll end up being rolled into one teen issue.
We're going to give it back to Steve.
Or you'll get family issues, or you'll get drug abuse problems. Maybe you go into a community that they talk about people dealing with addictions, and other people will talk about a lot of breaking and entering and crime to support drug habits. I don't even know what that is. That's not mine. No, I don't know what that is. So does that make sense? This is just a practice for you to kind of get an idea of what some of those would look like. Here you go. Does that make sense? So any questions on that? I'm not going to go over. Yeah, please.
Comments.
Yes, please.
Aunque las encuestas muchas veces reflejan las necesidades de una comunidad, although a lot of surveys may reflect necessities of a community, a veces no necesariamente la encuesta me va a decir el problema real.
Perhaps not always the survey may tell me the real problem.
Voy a usar, por ejemplo, el tema de los teenagers que están metidos en problemas.
For example, I'm going to use the teenagers case.
En segundo lugar, dice que están en vandalismo y droga.
It says that they are in vandalism and in drugs.
Y el tercer elemento que hay ahí dice que las escuelas tienen un proceso de enseñanza y aprendizaje pobre.
And the third says that the schools are poor in educating.
Si vemos el trasfondo en realidad no es lo que la encuesta me está reflejando, sino que hay un problema de vida familiar anterior.
If I look deeper, I'm able to see that there is a family issue
Perhaps.
in the back.
Es decir, que los resultados de la encuesta es bueno llevarlos a un proceso más profundo para ver realmente cuál es la raíz del problema.
So if I go deeper, I may find a deeper problem that is lying behind all of that.
That's a very good
Por ejemplo, si
point.
estoy en una ciudad y tengo muchos homeless,
So in the event that if I'm in a city that I have a lot of homeless,
de repente el problema es que en esa ciudad se vende droga con facilidad o hay droga.
There might be a possibility that they're selling a lot of drugs in that area.
Y quizás muchos homeless se mueven al área porque ahí pueden conseguir la droga con facilidad.
So perhaps there is a lot of homeless in that area because of the drug use.
Mi reflexión es que no siempre la encuesta refleja lo que realmente está pasando.
My reflection is perhaps not always the survey will tell me exactly what the problem
Pero la
is.
encuesta es un indicativo para ir a la raíz del problema.
But it is a guide or a point to take me to the root of the problem.
Yeah, and you can talk to professionals in that community as you start kind of dissecting what the community looks like. You can begin to talk to police officers, to social workers, teachers, anybody else to help you dig down. I think that's a very good point.
Quick announcement, guys. There are 2 of these little microphones. The lanyard he's wearing is a mic, so any question you ask will not be heard unless you have one of these for the recording purposes. So please use one of these when you're asking questions.
And just on this, on Omega, as I'm looking at this, I think maybe the last one there, politics, may be the root of the whole problem.
Could be.
Because schools are underfunded, there is very little accessible traffic coordination, high crime, lots of drugs, and so maybe something that you could do for the community is actually getting involved in social justice.
Could be, yeah. Then again, remember, you can only take care of certain problems. Yeah. As a church, you can't do everything. But all right, good.
Really good in politics.
All right, excellent. All right, so let's go to step 2 now. This is listing your core values. Yeah.
Just quickly, do you have the surveys?
No, the survey is literally those 3 questions.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's all I ask ever. And it's usually I only ask 2 questions. Unless they're really engaged, then I ask, would you like to partner with us? Yeah.
Si la iglesia estuviera involucrada con la comunidad, la encuesta está hecha.
If the church would be involved in the community, then the survey would be done.
Yeah.
Pero muchas veces la iglesia no es una iglesia amigable,
Yeah.
no conoce las necesidades de la comunidad.
But we're talking about planting a church maybe in an area that's not a lot of Adventists. Perhaps. Yeah, you never know. Yeah. Okay. For time's sake, we're going to keep going. Number 2, list your core values. What are core values? Why is this one of the 10 steps? Why is this listed second? Then I'm going to answer all of those. Core values are what guides your behavior within the church as well as how you interact with the world. Core values, you can replace the word DNA. It is really your culture, your DNA, who you actually are, not who you want to be, but the kind of church you're actually going to create, and the kind of unique Adventist church you will be to reach a specific community. So we're going to go into this and explain this. I like core values better than trying to start with a mission statement or a value statement. I have no problem with mission statements and value statements, but in the business world, we know that core values trumps it all. And it's the same thing in the church world. When you start with a mission statement and it's not your values, it makes no sense. You've got to know your values before you know what your mission statement is, before you know what your anything else. Core values really will dictate how your church acts and behaves with the community and with one another. So how can you know your core values? And how can they help? We're going to go through that in this step. So this is one of the ways that values helps. When you understand the values that you have, when you have a vision or a goal, something that you want to accomplish, your action steps and your methods will align to make that happen. Because values actually act like a barrier, like the riverbank walls, or as everything will flow one direction in alignment. If your church is created on certain values, and I'll explain this more as we go on, but they are so vital. They are so vital. When churches do not identify their values before they plant, then you get a ton of different values. You get this lady's idea of what a church should be like, and that couple's idea of what a church should be like, and that elder's idea of what a church should be like, and everybody brings their own values into the mix, and you end up having a church that is bouncing all over the place instead of staying razor sharp focused on the community that is there to serve. So what we want to do is, there it is. I want to share with you the various kinds of values, and this will help explain this a little bit more. All right, so a church, and we see churches like this a lot. They're doing a lot of effort, and they're doing work, they're busy, and there's no results. And it's a lot like a faucet turned on in your house. You turn the faucet on, and it just runs and makes a puddle outside the house, right? It's not really doing anything beneficial. But sometimes you'll have in a church, they'll say, you know what, we should be doing something for the harvest. We should be doing something for those far from Christ. And they turn the faucet on, and the harvest is out there, and they keep just doing all the work right where they're at. And they know it should be happening, but none of the water is getting into the harvest. None of the efforts are moving into the harvest. But then maybe you'll have a church where a guy says, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. And so he begins to try and move some of that work into the harvest. And it's a lot like a guy taking his hands under the faucet, filling his hands up, running over to the field, throwing some water on, running back, getting some more water, running back, throwing what's left in his hands as he runs back to the field. How efficient is that? But at least a little bit of effort is going into the harvest now. Now, once you get a group of people who say, you know what, we need to do this. We think, and maybe it's even talk around the church, we need to be harvest-focused people. And so it's a much more like this. They start doing more things together. And so it's like a bucket. You fill up the bucket, you run over the field, and you throw water on. You run back, fill up the bucket, run back to the field, throw water on. Now the field is getting a little bit more water. But a church that has true values for the harvest is like a church, like a hose. They take the hose and they spray where it's needed because everything is focused where it should go. And that's when we're planting a church for the harvest. We need to know that our core values are in alignment with that harvest so that we're reaching those people. So let me give you some examples of what core values look like. Anybody here ever shop at Walmart before? What is Walmart known for? Cheap. Everybody knows, right? You know what Walmart's core value is? Low prices. That's their core value. And you can see it. Core values are things that you can actually see. It's not things that you hope to be, it's who you are. The core value is who you are. Walmart is known for low prices. Now, how about Nordstrom's? Anybody shop at Nordstrom's? Yeah. But what are they known for besides not being cheap? Yeah, quality and customer service, for sure. Their products last. I mean, my wife's like, man, when I buy something from Nordstrom's, it can last forever. And their customer service is second to none. Like, she would call up. We had a lady that was her personal shopper. She came to our house, looked at everything in my wife's closet. And we're not rich. I'm a pastor. But somebody from Nordstrom's came to our house, looked at her closet, knew what she had, and then when my wife wanted to buy something new, she'd call up and say, I need a couple of outfits. And she would show up to the Nordstrom's, and this lady, knowing what my wife already had, shoes, pants, all these things, had all of these outfits waiting for her.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is what they do. People don't even know that Nordstrom's has this for free. And she would go in, and it would usually be 6 to 12 outfits, and the lady would say, no, that doesn't look good as I thought it would. Oh, that's a perfect fit for this. You know, I mean, it was just like boom, boom. It's incredible customer service. So the core values are usually very easy to see. Now, they're both big department stores, right? They both sell clothes and other stuff like that, but they're totally different because of their core values. Walmart's core value is we're going to be cheap. We're going to sell things inexpensive as possible. Nordstrom's core values are we're going to have the best customer service possible and high quality goods. And when you have those core values, it changes the kind of store you're going to be. So when you have core values in a church, it changes the kind of church you're going to be. When you're planting a church and you know what the core values are going to be, it changes everything. So there's several different kinds of core values. You have a handout on this as well. And I want to go through those because people get confused on what exactly is a core value. So there's a value called a gateway value. And this is a value that every Adventist church should share in common. These are values that are like our doctrines, right? Those aren't your core values. You cannot be an Adventist church without these. You're not going to start an Adventist church that says Sabbath is on Wednesday and have pork barbecue after service, right? You're not going to be an Adventist church very long if you try and that kind of stuff. So the gateway values are the things that all Adventist churches share in common. We believe in Jesus, we believe in the Bible, we have our 28 fundamental beliefs, those things. Those aren't your core values. Core values are what make you unique. Why are you a unique Adventist church? What makes you different for the needs of this community? Now, what are unintended values? These are usually negative results of your core values. They don't always have to be, but they usually are. So let's go back to Walmart. Their core value is inexpensive. What is a negative result of that core value? Yeah, the quality stuff is, but there's another one too.
Wait in line forever.
Horrible customer service. To make their things cheap, they don't spend a lot of money on employees. You know, you go in there and they got 63, lines and only 2 of them are open. Yep. That kind of thing. They don't spend a lot of time training their employees. They hire people at part-time so they don't have to give them benefits. So they're not highly invested. So they're saving a lot of money on labor costs so that they can give you cheap products. But an unintended value of that is poor quality goods and poor customer service. Now let's go to Nordstrom's. What's an unintended value of Nordstrom's? It's too expensive, right? We can't afford that. Having great customer service and high quality goods, that means their prices are very high. So an unintended value would be the cost. So when you're creating core values, you've got to be careful not to have a blaring negativity attached to it, such as churches that say, and every Adventist church should say this, but you hear churches say, we are people who are following the Bible to the letter. But really what that means is they're using the Bible to beat people over the head when they don't do the things the way that they say. Some churches are like that, not everyone. That could be an unintended value. So you've got to look at your values and make sure when you're implementing them, you're not creating a negative backlash on the backside too. Target values are sometimes called aspirational values. These are values that people want to have, but are usually not very realistic, and it's certainly not what they have now. I've heard churches say, we're going to be the friendliest church in the world. Well, how do you know? How are you going to measure that you're the friendliest church in the world? I can probably guarantee you're not the friendliest church in the world. In fact, usually if you say you're the friendliest church in the world, that means you're friendly to each other and not to outsiders. That's typically what I see with those churches that are so friendly. So you got to be careful with aspirational values. Core values, are those of what you actually are. Now in church planting, you don't have anything yet, so technically everything is aspirational. You're building the product. But you can actually create realistic values that your church is going to be built upon as you're building this new church. Deception values, the only reason I put that on there is because it's a real thing, but it's not something that churches have to worry about. Deception values are usually when you call something one thing and it's exactly the opposite on purpose. And that's usually found in politics a lot. They love to write a bill saying, you know, this is to benefit so-and-so, and it really cuts all their funding to that thing or something. You know, that's a typical deception value that politics use. Now, we have some churches like Westboro Baptist Church. You know, they have a lot of deception values. You know, we want to follow Jesus. The only thing they forgot about is the love that Jesus teaches, right? They do all this negative stuff, you know, picketing soldiers' funerals and things like that, crazy stuff. All right, so does that make sense? So when you're developing your core values, what you want to do is look at the needs of the community, look at who the community is, and figure out what kind of church, what kind of DNA should we have that will make the greatest impact for that community. And this isn't something that happens easy. You're going to have to take time to do this. We could spend an entire 2 days on just how to develop core values. We don't have that kind of time. But this at least gives you an idea. This is a step you should take. Think about the DNA you're creating. Make sure that you're creating something healthy and for the community. Instead of just replacing what Adventists did in this community into this community. And frankly, what happened is the church that maybe you're planting out of, if you're planting out of a church, they looked at a community and saw a need, or a culture, and they saw a need, and they were reaching that need one day. Now, the community changed, but they probably didn't change. Churches get stuck in a rut. You know how it is. And so their culture still reaches the community from 40 years ago. And then we transplant that culture that's not reaching the current community into a new community, thinking it's going to help in this community. It might have some impact, but it doesn't have high impact. We want to be very, very purposeful. I can't stress to you enough how far behind we are in thinking about this stuff. It is shockingly behind. In the business world, like my wife is major into retail, and she worked for Target and Barnes & Nobles, and the stuff that they did is phenomenal. They would interview 5th graders. Why would they interview 5th graders? Because they were designing their systems for the next generation. You think that the self-scanning is because it's cheaper for a business? It's not cheaper. Those self-checkouts where you go through and check out, it actually costs the businesses more to do those than to have an employee because of the theft that happens, and they also have to have a whole security team, which they get paid a lot more per hour than a normal checker does. So it's actually cost them more. Why did they do that? Because they found out that the younger generations don't want to talk to people. Seriously. That is a normal thing. They don't want to talk to people. And in fact, now they don't even want to go in the store. Social media and different video games, all these things that have created this isolation culture where we actually don't interact with humans, we interact electronically instead, has changed how human behavior is happening. And so now they don't even want to go in the store. You'll see now, and I'm sure you have some stores like this, where you can drive up and pick up your order. Yeah. Right? You could text in, I pre-ordered it online, I drive up and I'll order and I'll pick it up. But they're finding that there are younger people now that are going into those places, like they go to Best Buy. They'll go in and park in one of those things, then take their phone, order the thing, and they'll wait 45 minutes in that spot when it would have taken them 5 minutes to walk in the store, pick it off the shelf, and go through the thing. That is literally how things are moving right now. That's why you see stores that are making these changes. It's not because they're so innovative. It's because they're thinking about the future and who the future customer is. And it's making a total change. But the church hasn't done this. We're not thinking about who we're serving. We're not thinking about the people that we are here to help reach for Christ. And that's because we're not using Christ's method alone, getting out there and mingling first. All right? Any questions on core values? Yes, please.
I'm bad, microphone.
Man, you're good.
That was quick. Do I have to push the button or is it automatic?
If it's on red, it's on.
Now we go. Okay, so my question on the core values is, I'm wondering, would it be better to use a Venn diagram in dealing with these core values? Because I would think that there are certain core values that we have within the Adventist Church that are shared with the community in which we go in.
Yeah.
And that's the one we should be targeting, and rather leave the other core values that we may have that are strong for us, but maybe not so strong in the community. So maybe a Venn diagram would be...
Yeah, but then again, you're assuming that everything we have meets the needs of the community. And that's not necessarily true. So there may be, like we don't have right now, let's say their number one need is teen pregnancy. So what in our core values meets the need of teen pregnancy? I mean, we could stretch it and say, well, if we stretch it this way and this way, but we just don't know. So we don't know for sure everything that we have. Not that you're saying is wrong, but we've got to be careful to think.
But we have things within our core values that certainly would cover that talk.
You mean more like our gateway values?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, we're talking semantics,
right?
But
right.
You know.
But who we are as a church, and we don't plant a church if Adventism isn't helpful. It should be helpful. Yeah.
Yes.
But we still have to focus very strategically on the greatest needs of the community, even if the Adventist church has never done anything to help meet that need before. We've got to find a way to meet those needs in a Christ-like manner. We're doing it in a way that glorifies Christ. The same way Jesus did. Mingle, show them sympathy, find ways to meet their needs before we start pressing our religion on them. We press our goodwill on them. We show them how much we love them by serving them correctly. Yeah.
When you start a church, all of the core values are aspirational, as you stated, right?
Right.
What do you do when 2 years or 3 years go by and you've excelled perhaps at 4 or 5 of them? What do you do with the aspirational values that you have not perhaps reached?
So usually you only want to pick core values 3 to 5. You don't want to overdo it. I stay with 3 usually. So you're really hyper-focused on things that help the community the most. 2 is you're creating that before you launch. That's what all this pre-launch process is. You'll learn more about that as we go on. So you're actually developing that DNA before you have your first service. And it's totally different than what a lot of Adventist churches are launching like.
So you should, at the beginning, even though they're aspirational, you already excelling at them?
Well, you will be before you become an actual church.
Before you launch it?
Yes, before you launch it. You're training your team how to do those things, how to be those things. You're creating the DNA. Just like when a baby's born, the DNA is created.
Right.
We're creating the DNA.
Right.
We'll explain that more in detail as time goes on. Yeah.
You've used examples from Walmart and Nordstrom. Give us some examples from church plants.
Yeah. So we might have, we already had some. These are actually examples from church plants that we gave you.
Okay.
Those are real examples. So how do you create a core value based on that? So when I did, like the church in Seattle, when we were planting for a target group, young adults. We found several things that they saw was the greatest need. One, the church didn't accept them. They didn't feel accepted. If they thought differently, if they looked differently, if they dressed differently, anything, if they had a sin in their life, they were not accepted. So accepting was one of our core values. They also thought the church felt dead. And they wanted to actually come and enjoy church. Doesn't mean it has to be loud rock and roll music, but it has to be something that they actually want, because I think Jesus is exciting. So our second core value was exciting. And then the next thing is they thought the biggest problem with church is it's filled with hypocrites. And so we just said, you know what? We are all sinners, and we're going to be transparent. So our third core value was real. So accepting, exciting, real. That was our 3 core values that we based everything we did on that.
It happened that sometimes the group of people that would like to help in the planting project, hard worker, missionary people, they don't have the core values that you know that new congregation has to have. And I hear that you prepare that team, but what do you do when you know that, let's say you have a group of 10, 12 people, and the majority of them, you know that they never are going to have those core values that are needed.
So you'll need to stay here for step 5.
Okay.
We answer that exact question. Very good question. I'm glad you saw it. Okay, get in your groups. You have only 6 minutes for this exercise. 6 minutes. You should see on page 2 there. Step 2, core values, group discussion. All right, this is a step, whether you're planting or not, that will be very useful for you. All right? And so I call this step, know your goals for members. So let me explain real quickly what that means. When you have people come into your church, do you know how you want them to grow, where you want them to end up? Very important. So let me ask you a question. You ready? Here's the question. How many disciples do you have in your church today? Disciples, like how many have you counted? Give me the exact number of disciples you have in your church today. This is what I hear around the world. People don't have an answer for this. What did Jesus say go make?
Disciples.
Wait, he said go make disciples, and yet everywhere we go when we say, how many disciples do you have? Nobody has an answer.
Same amount of membership.
That's, we wish, it's not reality.
Attendance would certainly.
That doesn't mean they're disciples. So now let's define disciple. When I'm talking about disciple, I'm talking about somebody who is a strong disciple, not just a follower. A shadow can follow Jesus. That's much. We're talking about people that are actually being formed into the image of Jesus. They're in that. They have a discipleship process. They're growing into Him. Now, it might be different. Every church can define that, but no churches are defining it. The reason we don't know how many disciples we have is because we don't know what it is. What is the disciple? Is it just a follower? Is that all that Jesus made? Is just followers? Was it just followers who spread the good news around the world? Exactly. Disciples are leaders. They're people who take God's work into the world and multiply it. So, when we say how many disciples we have, we're not talking about just people who say, I follow Jesus. It's much deeper than that, yes?
Well, I think the reason you're not getting a lot of answers on that is because there are so many definitions of disciples.
I agree.
I can give you an answer what I think is disciple.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. But that might not be what you're asking for.
That's actually is exactly what I'm asking for. I want churches to tell me what they think is a disciple, because people aren't even defining it that much. People are making zero definitions of discipleship. So what we want to have is we want to actually know, does your church have a clear path for members to become disciples? When somebody walks in your church and says yes to Jesus, do they know how to become His disciple? Do they know how to become an effective leader for Christ? Whatever that may look like. I mean, that's what we need. We need a clear pathway. There's a few churches that are doing that, but very, very few. Very few. So, again, Jesus said to go find disciples. Is that what He said, right?
Make.
Oh, make disciples. What does make mean to you? Yeah, exactly. It's an active word where you're intentionally building people up. You're making disciples. If I told you to go make a rocking chair, would you just hand me a piece of wood? That wouldn't be a rocking chair, right? It might be the materials to make a rocking chair. So it's got to be more than just a plan. It has to be an implemented plan. You have to understand what the end product is, a disciple. You have to know exactly what you're going to be doing. Now, it doesn't have to be, every person grows at different rates, so it's not like, these 43 steps and you become a disciple exactly like this. And then you have to do it in 16 and a half months. It doesn't work like that. But you do have to have a process that people can follow so that they can become disciples. And it actually has to be something that you can measure. Why are we not making disciples? Because we don't know how to measure it. How do you measure discipleship? We can measure baptisms, right? Because you know if somebody's been baptized or not. And so the conference says, how many baptisms have you had? Jesus didn't say go make baptisms. He said baptism is part of the process of discipleship. But that's not the end product. The end product was discipleship. The others are supportive of discipleship. Teaching them to obey all things, baptize, all those things. So baptism is important. We also look at tithe, right? Because it's something we can say. We know how much tithe we got. We can measure that thing. But we don't measure discipleship because first, we've not defined it, and we've not made it measurable. So we're going to talk about how to do that. Don't ask yet. Just asking at the end of it, okay? Because I may be answering all your questions in this process, all right? So I'm going to give you a little breakdown of how I define it, but I don't want you to copy me. What we ask our churches to do is go into the Bible and find out what the Bible says about discipleship.
Amen.
The guy that I just am training right now that's doing a Chinese church plant, I have never, ever seen anybody tear apart the Bible the way he did. Amazing. I asked him to go look at what discipleship looks like in the Bible. I expected he would look, at the Gospels. He went through the entire Bible. Everything that was a teaching point, he wrote down. I mean, it blew my mind. As soon as I saw it, I told him to email it to me immediately, because if his computer crashed, I don't want that information lost. I mean, it is really cool. But then he has to boil that down, right? You can't say, well, here is the 287 things I found. We're going to do all these things. So then he's boiling it down. He boiled his down to 4 areas that they focus on. And when I did it, we boiled it down to 3. Here's the 3 that I had. What do disciples look like? Well, first we found in the Bible that disciples were mission-minded. They are people that think about the mission that Christ has called us to be on. That is something that actually is they're contemplating and working through, thinking about, making plans for. So mission-minded people, they are going as evangelists. Wherever they go, they know that they are called to share Christ. They're not going once a year to do it. They are living evangelists. B, they have a servant's heart. Mission-minded people understand that Jesus was powerful as an evangelist because he was powerful as a servant. That when we serve people, it impacts lives. And then the next part is the next person culture. This is the hardest thing by far. And by the way, there's a handout with all this in there too, so you don't have to take notes on this. By far, this is the hardest thing for Adventists right here. The next person culture. This means that we are creating churches for the next person that walks in the door that doesn't know Jesus. Not for Adventists.
All right.
We do not make churches for Adventists. Period. That's not what we're here for. Amen. The Bible is clear on this. Did you know the church is not for you? Amen. The Bible says that we are parts of a living body. We are the body, Christ is the head. The Bible says that we are the stones for the temple. If you look throughout the Bible, you will see that the church isn't for us, we are church. Together, we are church. It's not for us because we are it. And we are here as the body of Christ to do the same thing Jesus did, to go seek and save the lost. If Jesus was on earth, he sought to save the lost. And as the body of Christ, we are to do the same thing, to seek and save the lost. So we are here to make an impact as mission-minded people. Second thing, growth seeking. We found that disciples were people who are looking to grow. Spiritual growth, getting closer to Christ, understanding better the calling of Jesus, understanding the disciplines that we are given. We're also called to live a life of excellence. I am really, really tired of seeing churches punt. You know what that means? Where they're just giving half an effort. You know, you get to church and then they decide that morning what songs they're going to sing. No practicing. You go into the bathroom and nobody cleaned it. I mean, that for me, it is unbelievable that we would have churches that are giving a half effort. It would be almost better to not do church than to give half efforts. Because what kind of signal does that show the new person walking in?
God is sloppy.
Yeah, but we don't really care. We say we honor God, we give him our all, we sing all these songs about how great, majestic, and awesome he is, and yet we give him our scraps. We give him our blemished sacrifices. What does God say about that? It's better if you didn't do it at all, right? Than give me the blemished sacrifices. So we want not perfection. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for excellence, doing the best that we can. And then, of course, growth seekers are disciple makers. They are people who multiply themselves. Disciples multiply disciples. And then the third thing is they embrace community. Disciples love. They love people. They love their brothers and sisters in Christ. Remember when Jesus prayed for us? What did he pray for? Exactly. He prayed for unity, so incredible unity that he said, I want you to be so united with each other that it will be just like my union with the Father in heaven.
Amen.
And that just freaks me out. How in the world are we going to be so united? How many gods do we serve?
One.
Wait a minute. Father, Son, Holy Spirit? Those are three unique portions of God. But divine love is so powerful, so amazing that we only have one God. That is the force behind divine love. It makes people one. And he calls for us to have that exact same oneness, both with himself and with each other.
Amen.
Imagine if we lived like that. How many church fights would we have? I mean, we could disagree, but we wouldn't have these horrible fights that we have in some churches. We would care about the needs of each other. We would look a lot like the book of Acts, right? I mean, it would be a lot different looking. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in our churches that I plant, we made it so that you can't be a member if you're not part of a small group, because you're not going to be able to grow into the likeness of Christ listening just to the sermon. That's not enough. You won't build relationships listening to me or somebody else talk. You actually have to find ways to delve into relationships. But we include our Sabbath schools as part of small groups. That is because we do our Sabbath schools like a small group. It's not just a talking head. It's a way to make relationships in the groups. And then we also do our ministries as teams. We don't have a leader of this, and then they are running the show by themselves. We make every ministry basically like a small group. And everybody has to be part of ministry. You also cannot join our church if you do not join a ministry, period. And we will lovingly help you find another church if you cannot do those things. Why? Because we are creating a culture for new people. If an Adventist does not want to do those things, we will help them find another church so that they don't poison the culture for new people walking in. So when I say next person culture, we're dead serious about it. Everything we do is to make sure that when people come in, they can see the picture of Christ as close as we are able to make it. Now, we're growing, failed human beings. We're not going to be perfect. But we're going to do whatever we can to show Jesus in the culture of this church. Amen. That's why core values are so important, because you're creating this kind of DNA. And when you put your expectations high, guess what? People meet them. When you put your expectations low, guess what? People meet them. Whatever your expectations is where people go. And the only people we scare away with high expectations are Adventists. And I don't have any problem doing that. Because they're already saved, praise God. They know where they're going. I mean, I hope they are. I hope they are. But, you know, we're here to try and help those who don't know Jesus. All right, so questions on creating a discipleship pathway. Once you define what it is supposed to look like, then you create a pathway. And I'm not going to give you tons of examples, because I found when I first started giving people examples of discipleship pathways, all they did is copied them. If you copy it, it's not going to work. It's something that you have to create. It takes a lot of work. It's worth it. The first time you develop a discipleship pathway, you will understand how to make disciples. If you just copy it, you still won't understand. But once you actually have to get into the Bible, find out what a disciple looks like, and create a pathway for people to grow there, then you will know how to make disciples. Because it will be based on how God created you and that unique experience you're going to have in that community. So, how do you, one other thing, how do you measure them? How do we measure? Everybody can do it differently. We measure by self-evaluation. We have a 32-point questionnaire that we use that people answer, and it's a self-reflection of their growth. Every 6 months they take this, and they can self-analyze how they're growing as a disciple. And then we can use that information to help us also as a church to see if we're making progress. Are people growing to the next level? Are they getting stronger and stronger as disciples? Or is everybody staying stagnant? Or do we have one question that everybody's way low on? We can work on that one area as well. So it's a way for people to help them decide where they're struggling as a disciple. We give them lots of opportunities to grow in that area. We give them lots of, there's many, many choices they can take. For every single one of the questions that they're low on, there's a lot of choices to help them grow over the next 6 months. And we ask them just grow in that one area, or maybe 2 at most, over the next 6 months. And then retake the self-evaluation. Then find out what is the area that you really need to work on this time. Spend the next 6 months working on that. But what you find is when you spend your time working on one area, it helps several areas, because they're all interlinked in a lot of ways. All right, questions? Yes.
Just a comment about how to get in and find out for ourselves what the discipleship model is, or the pathway. The things that have helped me is just going through the Gospels and asking, what did Jesus do with them? What did he live out? What did he ask them to do? How did he work with it?
Yeah.
So that they're doing that. And then you go back through that, not just the first time asking the question, what does it mean for me to be a disciple of Jesus? The second time asking, how did Jesus do the process of discipleship, so that I'm learning how to do it then with someone else. And then another way is to look at everything he said. There's only about 10 things that Jesus said, here's what a disciple is.
Right.
But looking at those specifically gives another view
Exactly.
to it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very good. And if on your sheet, I think that I gave you the text that we use as reasons why. I didn't mention the social justice just because we're short on time, but that's also.
Copy the questionnaire, or is that another thing that you?
Yeah, that's on the website.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I saw another hand somewhere. Yes, sorry.
let's assume that I'm the other pastor where you send the member that want to be a real disciple. Because we were talking acceptance in those communities.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Probably you're going to touch it in number 5 again. But
So we do acceptance. We do acceptance of where people are, but not where they're going to stay. We want to accept people right where they are, but with the expectation they're going to grow. And when we're accepting people, it's usually broken Adventists or non-Adventists. But once they have said, "I am accepting Christ. I want to be a member," we expect you to grow.
and if they don't do it,
Then we find another place for them.
and I'm the pastor in the other church, what I do then?
There's a lot of churches that would love to have our people. Wow, you're giving us a member? Great, because it's more for numbers.
No, those members.
Yeah, they're not bad people. They may be great people, but their priorities are my work, or I'm too busy for this, or I just don't want to do it. They're maybe great people. It's not that they're negative people. I don't
control people.
I don't send sick people like, "You're a horrible person, go to another church."
Did you say that you have examples of discipleship pathways?
I won't tell you I have those because I don't want you to ask for them. I'm not going to give them to you. You really need to design something yourself.
Yeah, I mean, look, so that's one of the things in church planting. When I started it was one of the hardest things because we talk about discipleship, we know that it's Bible-based, but when...
I will give you an example. Okay, let's go back to that. Let's go to that sheet. Let's say that you picked mission-minded as one of the things as well, something like that. So how are you going to help somebody grow as a missionary? You have to actually think about, what can I do? Am I going to teach a class? Or am I also going to add some personal mentorship? What does it look like to be you have to actually think through this process. Because if I give you a piece of paper, what I'm giving you it's like trying to teach you algebra or statistics by giving you the problem, the answer, and never showing you how to get there.
So a disciple is going to look differently in each of the church because of the values and the mission of that local church in their community.
The disciple is going to look unique because of the way that each pastor or leader of the church interprets what a disciple looks like in the Bible. Discipleship isn't the same thing as core values. Discipleship is based on what Jesus shared with us. He said, "Go make disciples." What is Jesus talking about? What does that look like? When you read the Bible, you have to determine for yourself, what does that look like? That's not the hard part. You'll find that that's actually pretty easy to determine what a disciple looks like. The harder part is, how do you actually make that? When he says make it, it is an actual intentional process. How do I intentionally bring somebody from here to whatever that is supposed to be? What are the steps that I will need to take to get there? And you're going to fail, you're going to mess up, and you're going to praise Jesus every time you do because it's going to teach you so many lessons. I would not steal this from you for the world.
So a disciple in your church will be different than a disciple in my church.
Yeah, they'd probably be pretty similar. We might have a little few different terms and stuff, but the process that they got there will be probably a little bit different. You might be, so like your method, my method is one-on-one or small group mentorship. I live for that. And so every church I go to, I pick the people that I think are going to make the biggest impact. I delve into them tons of hours, massive time into those people, getting them ready to do the same for others. That's my process. Your process, maybe you're a fantastic teacher, and you can teach in a way that, wow, that makes so much sense. And you can do a teaching program. Or somebody else might have a different process through shared small group experience. I don't know, whatever works best for you. So it's
just the method of getting there based on the culture and local setting of the church.
Exactly, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, any other questions? All right, let's continue. We have some table talk time. You'll see now in this one that this page, you're only doing half the page. Step 3 is half the page, all right? You have 8 minutes to do this one.
What's the difference between knowing something should be done and strategically planning for it to get done?
What is the difference between knowing something should be done and strategically planning for it to get done?
Okay, this table, question number 1. Okay, read the question and what's your answer to this one? Whoever.
Okay, what is the difference between knowing something should be done and strategically planning for it to get done? Microphone? Thank you. So what is the difference between knowing something should be done and strategically planning for it to get done? What do you guys think?
Go ahead and answer it, somebody.
We said that knowing it should be done kind of looks like the solution, just having the end answer in mind, whereas strategically planning to get it done means breaking it down into simple steps along the way so that there's a clear path for how to get to that end result.
So intention.
Right.
And then the intentional
Proactivity,
knowledge.
Yeah. So I know I need to lose 25 pounds. All right? If that's my plan, that doesn't get me very far, right? So that's what's called a lead measure. A lag measure. It's called a lag measure. So I know what I need, but what are the action steps or the lead measures? What will lead to that change? So maybe then I make a plan. I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to stop eating 2 quarts of ice cream at night or whatever it is that I don't do. You see what I'm saying? So those are the processes that we are thinking about. It's got to be more than just we need to make disciples. We preach about it all the time. We have got to have a process. Good, good. Right, so question number 2. Name 3 things common in all disciples.
We mentioned that, first of all, a disciple has to be passionate about God.
Yeah,
There are people
good.
that are passionate about other things.
Okay.
We mentioned that a disciple is also someone who is willing to always be learning.
Good.
So it's not stagnant. And,
Yeah.
and what else did we mention? What was the third one? And the disciple needs to be always have a servant mentality.
Good, excellent. Good, good, good. Very good. Okay, question number 3. What are a few approaches your church, your new church, could take to help make members into strong disciples?
Exclude all weak disciples.
No.
Right here, boss. Right here. Right here.
We designate you.
We know there's different ways to do that, but Jesus specifically did it in groups.
Yeah.
And individually, one-to-one.
Good.
And I don't think there's, we've all experienced the failure of preaching it or inviting people to an afternoon seminar, and we recognize that very little changes by that method.
Right.
And so Christ's method, he built it right into the Great Commission when he said, make disciples how? These 3 ways. Go, do it while you're going, take them with you. Lead them to conversion. Don't neglect the deep spiritual issues in their life. And then 3, teach them to obey. In other words, not intellectual knowledge. It's practical, useful, in the field knowledge.
Good. Very good stuff. Very good stuff. All right, question 4.
We didn't get to question 4, but we started talking about it.
You got the really tough question.
But it's
How many members how many of your members should be developed into strong disciples?
should.
Yes, should.
In a perfect world, all of them.
Right. Good. That's the answer. And why should all of them?
Because we're all called.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus told us to do that, right?
Yes.
He didn't say go make disciples of some of the nations, right?
Yes.
All nations. Very good. Very good.
Yo tengo alguna pregunta con la pregunta 4. So I have a... Pero la
Yeah,
pregunta
yeah.
era cuántos deberían. Deberían, no cuántos tienen, sino que deberían. Deberían ser discípulos.
Okay, let's go on to step number 4. We're going to do 2 more steps today, 4 and 5. So step 4 is what we call the proposal and information sheet. And basically what this is is, one second, let me set this or I'll forget my time and I'll just go over. This is where we take all of this groundwork. So you notice I have never developed a team yet. I'm not even talking to people who might be on a team yet. Now, you might already have a team you can do these first 3 steps with, but don't try and expand it to a big team before you do these, what I call foundational steps. So you got to know the community. Who is the community? You have to know what the values of this church is going to be, and you have to develop a discipleship process. Listen, if you don't just develop the discipleship process early, you won't do it. I've seen so many people think they can put it off. Once the busyness of training a core team comes on, once the busyness of weekly services happen, your discipleship process, likelihood of getting that going, is very low. How many churches have talked about building a discipleship process? Almost every one, and where are they? Once you get started, it is very difficult. It is much better to start at the beginning to know the process, and then when you develop a core team, then you can use that to help train your core team to be disciples so that they can be training disciples once you open. So what we do is we take all 3 of those steps and we begin designing what the church is going to look like, creating the blueprint. This might be, it might have maps on it talking about where you're going to go. It'll talk about the information of what kind of people live in that community, what are their greatest needs, what are some of the ways that we're going to meet those needs, what are the values that this church is going to hold, how are we going to live out those values externally, internally, how are we going to, what is a disciple, how are we going to make disciples, how are we going to measure that, anything else you want to add on their budgets, leadership structure. The basic thing is you're creating the plan for the church. When you have a plan for the church, it is really useful. Really useful. The best person I've ever seen do this is Tim Matting, who is he's doing multi-site churches, multi-campus churches in the DC area. His proposals are phenomenal, like professional level proposals. We just shared this proposal, and he and I went and asked for money from somebody that usually gives about $2,000 for church planting projects. We shared this super professional, well thought out proposal. They gave us $75,000 for his church plant. His church plant now has almost $600,000 to plant a church in DC. We want to do things, not that every church is ever going to be like that, but a really, really well done proposal not only creates a blueprint for you to follow, but it is something that excites other people too. When you hand the conference a proposal that is well thought out, well organized, easy to follow, they're going to be excited about supporting you. When you hand it to a donor, when you hand it to potential members, when you hand it to pastors who are arguing, why should you be planting a church near me? All these proposals help you in so many ways. They're a lot of work to make them done right, but they are very helpful. And so that's why it's step 4 for us. Again, before we ever build a team, we create a proposal that is well done, and then we take that proposal and we use it, and we create a proposal and an information sheet. An information sheet is just the highlights of the proposal. It's a 1-page sheet, and you have an example information sheet in your packet. Your example is actually longer than what I usually use, but I wanted to give you a few more examples and some Thank you. Explanations. Couldn't get the P out. Explanations of what it was, what it is. So, if you look at that, let me get to that real quick. I want to point out something. If you look at it, you can see it's just a basic outline. Now, your proposal will have all of these things in it, but much more detailed. Maybe you're going to have nice graphs, nice maps, whatever it is you want to do. I don't make mine look amazing because I'm not that talented. But if I had somebody that I knew that was talented, like Tim Matting, who could help me figure it out, I'd make it look a lot better. I mean, his is super professional. But basically, this is what I'm going to use to also share with people who have more minor questions. I also use this as my recruiting tool. This sheet is my recruiting tool. This is what I use every time, or something very similar to that. So there's a process that we use to do this. Again, if you skip the other steps first, though, you're not going to have all the information to create a good proposal. Now, I do what's called apostolic church plants and usually parachute church plants. Let me explain both of those. I plant a church with 0 team. No mother church. I go in and plant a church. You know, they just call me. I go into an area, plant a church with no Adventist contacts beforehand. And no mother church is going to help me. I don't want those things. But that doesn't mean I'm doing it right. That's just how I work. I work best in that context. You might work better with a mother church, or you might work better in an area where you have a team that helps you develop that, especially if you don't have the apostolic gift set. That's my number one gift is apostleship, and how that helps me is that there is no wall I won't go through. I'm going to just keep smashing against that wall till it breaks down, because that's how I'm designed. They call it in business world the entrepreneurial mindset. And it's not a better gift or a worse gift. It's just the gift that you need in church planting. If you don't have that, make sure you partner with somebody who does, because there will be a lot of roadblocks in church planting. And if you're not somebody who sees roadblocks as an opportunity, you need somebody who sees that. And they will keep you motivated and focused and going forward. It's very difficult to plant churches without the apostolic gift. You can do it. It can work. It has worked many times. But if you don't have that in your gift set, then find it. It's going to be very helpful for you. But so I have it already, so I don't really see the need for a team to begin with, because I've done this for a lot of years. But the first couple plants, I had a team. So when you do it the first time, you may not feel confident enough to try this on your own, building these first 4 steps without a team. It's okay. No matter what, it's okay. You know, you don't have to do it exactly the way I do it. And then parachute planting means, basically it just means nobody's helping you. You're put into an area and you have nobody helping you. For me, I love a challenge. I try to go to the places, like I accepted the call to New York because it looked absolutely impossible. And so that's what excites me. I want to see something that nobody else is going to try. So our goal when I went to Potomac now, our goal is to plant 380 churches in the next 13 years. That is stupid, crazy number. 380 churches in the next 13 years. That's our goal. And we have a very strategic plan of how we're going to achieve that. Right now, we have 182 churches in our conference. So you can see how much growth we are planning on having in the next 13 years. But that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. That may not be how you're wired. And it doesn't, God wired you on purpose. And He wired you amazing. The problem that I have is that I run over people because I have that charge forward personality that I don't notice all the bodies in the ditches that I've ran over and left them. And so when I'm planting, when I start looking for a team, I've got to find people with the shepherding gift, the hospitality gifts, the gifts that I don't have, the gifts of mercy. I don't have those things. I don't. I mean, I wish I did. Wouldn't it be nice if we all had all the gifts like Jesus? But we don't. So when you're developing a team, if you have the apostolic gift, you can probably do this by yourself. But if you don't, find at least a couple of people that can that can help you with, we call them the pushing gifts. Apostleship, prophecy, and evangelism are the pushing gifts. Shepherding and teaching are the stabilizing gifts. I don't have those two. So if I go and plant a church and I don't bring those people in, we keep pushing and we never stabilize. And it's a big failure. You can't have that. We need all those kind of gifts. Does that make sense? So I'm creating this proposal sheet, this information sheet that I can use in many different ways. Very helpful. The more time you spend on it, I'm telling you, every minute you spend developing this will save you 2 hours at least in the future. So spend a ton of time making this look great, doing it right so that you know exactly, because then there's going to be people who are going to try and derail you. There are going to be people that say, no, we should do it like this. You know, I planted a church back in 1983, and this is what we did. Well, that's great. Praise God you did that. But that may not fit in the community that you're working in. All right? So, questions. This is a shorter one. Any questions on developing a proposal or an information sheet? And we'll talk about how to use that information sheet more in the next step.
So you said that a well-proposed church plant, will benefit, correct?
A good proposal.
A good proposal. So if we submit a good proposal to Robin Lopez, he'll give us a good $50,000 check.
I guarantee you that's probably not going to happen. But you know that there is a lot of money out there that conferences don't have yet. A lot of money. If we think of only the conference as our supporting funding thing, we're very limited in our scope. There are a lot of people who are going to give a lot of money. You know, I just got a check for over $200,000 for our evangelism fund. Because we don't think of only, narrow focused. We spread our nets out there.
Where these donors come from? Where do you shop around?
They're everywhere. They are everywhere.
Hispanic coordinators.
They're everywhere. So, I can't tell you where they are here, though. I don't. So, yes, question?
I guess I just wanted to back up what you're saying. The thing is that there is plenty of money for evangelism, for whatever, for the organization, for Lake Whitney, for whatever we want to do. But unless people see where we're going, they're not just going to give. It's not the same type of generation that many other people grew up as, where people would just give. The thing is that people want to see that their money is being used for not only a worthy cause, but are you being wise into spending my hard-earned money? And so that's something that we need to be cognizant upon, and stop shooting from the hip. And let's just, sit down, think things through, buy in other people's ideas, and move on.
Absolutely.
So I'm just backing up what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that it says here that, I guess you're aiming for 35 to 50 individuals for the core team.
Well, let's not ask that question yet. That's next.
Oh, you're going to explain that?
Yeah, that's coming up.
Okay, well, I guess.
One of those students that gets ahead of the team.
That's in the information sheet, I know, but I just don't want to get confusing.
Right, so maybe I can wait and then ask the question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. It may be explained in my next presentation, yeah. All right, any other questions? Yes. Oh.
Thank you. I guess I just wanted to ask, so I see that this information sheet could be used to get people to invest, money, capital into it, but could it also be skills and talents?
Anything.
Anything?
Anything, yeah. It's a great tool. Now, I will tell you that my driving force is multiplication. All I think about is multiplication. So when I plant a church, I don't go for big money. So like Tim Madding's got almost $600,000 to plant a church. I would never do that because that's not reproducible. And I don't ever want to plant a church that people could say, well, you did it because you had $600,000. I'm not begrudging him at all. praise God, they're doing a big research project for this church plant as well. So a big grant was for that part of it too. So but for me, I try to plant churches between $10,000 to $25,000, all I have. I want to have a very low budget church plant so that I can show people how it can be reproduced. So, but I can use it, like you said, I can use it for many other things too. It's very helpful. The main thing I want my conference to be my biggest cheerleader. I'm always my conference's biggest cheerleader. You know, I learned actually in Kansas, Nebraska, I made a huge mistake. I was aggressively defiant to the conference there because I thought they didn't know what they were doing. They were old people, and I was young, and I grew a church from 0 to 270 in 18 months, and I thought they don't know what they're doing. Obviously, I do. And then when it became push to shove, when we had a big problem with a mega donor in the conference who was against me, they chose that person's side over mine. It's because I didn't develop a relationship with my conference leadership. How you treat your leaders is how you will be treated as a leader. I treated my leaders very poorly, and then it came right back to bite me. So I always want to be their biggest cheerleader, and I do everything I can to make sure that they're my biggest cheerleader too. So very important. Yeah.
Will you address the renting versus buying at some point when you're looking for a facility to?
I'll just tell you now because it's not really in the presentations.
Okay.
I never buy. I will never. If I was in a church for 9 years, never bought, don't want to buy. I have no desire ever to own a building as a church planter. If I had an established church, I would use the building, but the building is like it's like creating a roadblock. Once you hit that size, you're at that size. You're done. You can't keep moving to the next bigger place. You can't find it, and then you have all this effort and money poured into a building. And for my Spanish brothers, I don't know if this conference is like this, but a lot of conferences, the Spanish, their biggest thing is getting a building. They just got to have a building. And that is the last thing you should think about.
Wow.
I mean, it is such a big deal. Don't buy a building. If you can avoid it, rent forever. Seriously, it is so much cheaper. It is, and I don't have to worry about when the building breaks down. I don't have to have deacons keeping the building up. We can use all this energy that we have and funds and outreach instead of taking care of a building. Interesting. I do the same thing with my home. I won't own a home. I don't want to deal with the headaches of owning a home. I only rent homes. Really? When I'm retired, I'll have enough money to buy a place. But then I'll have time to worry about it. But I don't want to worry about these things now. Let somebody else worry about all this stuff. So, yeah. That's okay. Microphone.
We're not here to debate about it.
No. I do want to do the counter argument on that because I understand where you're coming from, and I think that fits your personality.
Right.
But I do think that we also I don't think we need to put down people or churches that are looking for buildings, because I see a building as a part of the evangelistic plan of the church. It is a place that we can have as a center of influence. Many church members, they're used to going to a church building, and even though we are looking outside, we're also not trying to exclude our members that are disciples, maybe that we need to get going a little further down the path on discipleship. And so we all have our place, and all I'm saying on that is a church structure, or a structure, not necessarily a church, but a structure, a center of influence, I think is important.
Good. I'm no problem with that.
No, I'm just,
right.
Yeah, I just want to put that out there for all the conference leadership that are.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I would just say this. How many church buildings, percentage-wise, are actually centers of influence? Now, if you're doing it and you have that in mind, that's awesome.
How many buildings that I
we
have
own,
been I've been a pastor of,
we
that
as a
became
church.
centers of influence.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Praise God. Yeah, good.
Because that's the mindset, and if we can start using the churches as evangelistic centers all week long.
But what we use is our members' homes as centers of influence.
Yeah, but I have found I cannot work like that.
Yeah.
Because every time we move into a home, the group dies.
Yeah. No. I'm saying all the efforts we do outside of Sabbath are in homes.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Every group that I've tried to do in homes kills the group.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
the.
And again, there's no right way. I agree with you.
No. It's a personality thing, I
right.
think, and so I just don't want to make that a rule that we shouldn't have buildings, because I've seen actually that buildings can be very. Like personal homes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't buy a home, God bless you. I haven't bought. I bought a home and I lost it in 2008 for the crisis thingamajiggy. But you talk to people that are financially whatever, they say buy a home and pay it off, and that's your retirement.
Some say don't do it, some say do. So.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
All right, so we need to continue. So please, thank you. That's a good point, though. I agree. Look at step 4. It's the second half of that sheet. There are only 3 questions. You're going to have 5 minutes, so please quickly answer these as a group. 5 minutes. Okay, give me one way that you can use a well-written proposal. Everybody listening?
Keep the idea in the time.
What?
Keep the idea in the time.
What does that mean? I'm sorry. I'm not.
So what he's saying is that down the road, when we're making decisions, and should we do this? Should we buy? Should we whatever? You go back to that document, and you say, does that align with what we had established?
Okay, good.
Get direction.
Yeah, direction of the plant. Good. Okay. Another reason.
You can recruit people and resources to a vision or a clear plan.
Good. Another reason. You have any others?
Funds and clear vision.
Funds, clear vision. Okay, clear vision.
Right, and we said that it also creates excitement.
Excitement. Okay, hold on to that. Good. All right. So, what information would you conclude in your proposal? Real fast, just something quick. One thing.
Community needs.
Okay, community needs. What else would you put in your proposal?
Values.
Values. What else would you put in your proposal? Expectations. Good. That's good. No, seriously. That rocks. Most people don't think of that one. Very good. Whoever thought of that one. One more thing. What would you put in your proposal? Hopes. Okay. Like you hope to meet a need, or you hope to. Okay. Good. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Good.
Requirements.
Yeah. Expectations. Yeah. I like it. Good. All right. And what is the information sheet primarily used for? Just yell it out. There's only one primary use. Recruiting. Primary use. There's lots of uses, but that's its primary use. So guess what? We've gone through 4 of the 10 steps, and we haven't even talked about building a team. So guess what step 5 is? Building a team. We're there. It's a miracle.
Dallas Cowboys.
No, I said a real team. We want an effective team.
You hurt my feelings, Steve.
Be careful, be careful.
You're in Texas.
You can have an accident.
All right. So I want to first define what a core team is. Because we're going to be using the word core team quite a bit now. Core team is the team that you choose that becomes usually the leaders of your church, and they define the culture or the DNA of the church. They're the ones that you're going to train to live out the values of your church and be disciple makers in your discipleship process. And they're also going to be the ones that help meet the needs of the community. Not all of them are going to be engaged in all three of those to the same extent, but they're all going to be trained in each of these areas. So, what are some dangers of just inviting anybody to join a team? Just throw them out.
Weird people with weird agendas.
Weird agendas and weird people.
They'll unintentionally sabotage it or intentionally.
Yeah, some people are saboteurs.
Not aligned with the vision.
Not aligned with the vision.
Not committed.
Not committed.
Not mission-minded at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? Let me show you a couple of these things. Accepting every person who's interested often attracts those who want to control a new church. Have you ever met one of these?
Never.
There are lots of people who would like to control a church. And often they're attracted to church plants because they've made an attempt at other churches and failed. And so they think, whether intentionally or not, this would be a good place to take over. And so you get those people, sometimes, not always, but often you'll find those people when you just say, anybody who wants to join, come join. Now, once you have your grand opening, anybody can come in. You know, there's expectations of people once they join as members, but people can come in. We're talking about developing an intentional core team. So we don't want those people that are just there to control. There are also people who have issues with the Adventist church, whether they have issues with like conference leadership or a doctrine or whatever it is. You don't want people with that, because they'll sometimes try to get involved in church plants because for some reason people think that church plants are, oh, you're doing something outside the Adventist church. They don't understand that starting something new is not the same thing as starting something different than Adventism.
Yep.
I've had so many people come up to me and say, why did you decide to leave the Adventist church? I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, you're starting this new church. They never think about that their church was a plant one day.
Yeah.
Yep.
That every church has been planted. But if you're starting something new, it must not be Adventist. Because we're all the same and we're all over here.
Because we apparently don't start new things.
Yeah. So you got to be careful, because some people with issues with the Adventist church think that, oh, it's a new church plant, they're going to be liberal in their doctrines, or they're going to be okay with me dissing on leadership or whatever it is. Then there's also people who want to push a personal agenda. I've seen this, where people have a really dumb idea, and no church was dumb enough to accept their dumb idea. And they think, in a church plant, if I bring that idea here that's going to change the world, you know, I'm going to bring this to the church. Now, maybe you'll have people with agendas that are good. That's nothing wrong with good agendas. But you got to be careful with people who have a personal agenda. But the biggest portion of people that we don't accept in our core team are great people. They're amazing people. They just have different values. They don't line up with the values that we need for that community. And again, they may be great once we open the church, but we're trying to develop the right DNA, the right culture. And so we handpick people that understand what we're doing. They don't have to be perfect at it, but they have to understand what we're trying to do, and they have to be excited about being that kind of church. And so I don't have a set list of questions to determine how people think. I just talk to people. And so we use this kind of criteria also. If I want to build disciples who are going to make disciples, I have to know that when I'm talking to people, they're going to be able to grow in these 3 areas. Again, most Adventists haven't been discipled well yet, so they're not going to all be strong in all those 3 areas. But I have to see that they want to grow in these areas.
Yes.
They understand that we're supposed to be a missional church. It's not just there for them. They want to grow, and they want community. It's the first one that's the hardest hurdle to cover. That's where, when I basically, and I don't say no to their face, but when I say no to somebody, 9 times out of 10, it's because of mission-minded. They do not see past themselves. Church is for me. I'm a consumer, and it's not their fault. We have trained them to be consumers. When the majority of people are doing something, it's not the people's fault, it's the leader's fault. That's just how it is. We set the culture, we set the pace, and we haven't trained people to think past themselves in church often. All right? Not everybody, again, not everybody. So I look for red flags, and I'll explain how I do that. Because I want to develop a core team that shares the same vision. We want to be in alignment so we're going the same direction. If you try and develop a core team and you don't have the same vision, you're going to be pulled in many different directions. It's just not effective. Imagine if you started a school, and you're a music school, and you just hire random teachers that don't necessarily care about music. I don't really like music. Why don't we do PE school instead? No, I don't like that either. We should be math focused. No, I don't like that either. We should do this. It's going to be very difficult to create a successful school when your vision is to create a music school. The same thing when you're developing a church for the community that you're serving in, developing a church that's going to meet their needs, developing a church that is going to grow disciples, developing a church that shares similar values. You have a very specific focus you're building. So your core team, again, only your core team are handpicked. These are people that you do not just send out an open invitation. You just mentioned like 25 people, in some... That works. You can plant a church, and in some cultures that works better than others. In America, it doesn't work very well at all. It doesn't work very well at all. And we're seeing the results of some now again. Some churches have been planted like that. I planted my first 2 churches like that. And we did fine. We still did fine, but we weren't mission focused. We were just planting a church to plant a church. Because, somebody told me that was my job, is to plant a church, so I started a church. I didn't know that I was supposed to focus on the harvest. Never crossed my mind. So we have to make some of those decisions in the front end so that we can do that right. So this is what I do. I do what I call the interviews. Now, I never tell people, hey, I'd like to interview you to be part of my church plant. I don't use that kind of language. What I would do is I usually make a phone call like this. Ring, ring, I don't know the person. I'll explain how I got their name in a second. Hey, this is Steve Letty. I've been hired, or I sometimes don't say that. I just say I'm starting a new church in this area, but it is like nothing you've ever seen. We are designing something that is brand new and specific for this community. And I have no idea if you're interested or not, but what I want to do is I want to share the idea with some people, because they may be interested or they may know others who are, and that's all I'm asking. Can I spend some time with you? I'll treat you to, depends on your budget, a meal or a lemonade if you have a low budget, and just share with you what we're doing. Very simple. Very simple. And so this is why I have the information sheet, though, is that when they get there, I hand them the information sheet and I say, this is kind of an outline of our church. I don't use the proposal. It's too long. It's distracting. I don't want to use the proposal for most recruiting. unless I know they're super analytical types. If they're like a scientist or a mathematician, then I'm going to bring out the full proposal for them. But I'll still use the information sheet to kind of go through the conversation. And all I'm doing is really just having a conversation. The interview process is just to get to know people. So basically, I'll give you an example. The first time I did this was in Seattle. So I was in Kansas, Nebraska. We planted 3 churches there. The last church, we had a big problem with the core team. I mean, we grew like crazy, but the core team was very sick. And so my role in the church was I was trying to outgrow the core team. And we were being successful, then they fought back. And then I just said, you know what, that's a big mistake. I should have been more intentional, so I came up with this process. So the first time I went to Seattle, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about Seattle, really. I mean, I'd lived in the other side of Washington and driven through it a couple times, but never stopped. So how do I plant a church in an area where, by the way, that one of the evangelists who worked in the area said, I would never do an evangelistic series in there. There's no one who will ever come to church in that region. We planted right by where Microsoft is, in one of the wealthiest parts of the nation. Very, very unchurched. In fact, it was the #1 unchurched area in the nation at the time we were planting. How do you plant a church in that kind of environment? Well, I didn't know anybody, and I asked the conference, do you know anybody who knows anybody? And so they gave me some help with somebody who was also brand new to Seattle. Well, that was really helpful. But he had been a coal porter many years before, and so he had a couple of friends who had done some work with him. They were Adventist. So he knew 7 names. So I called them up, and I did the same thing. Hey, this guy Matt, he used to work with you, and he's helping me plant or start a brand new church in this area. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. I really would love to share with you what we're going to be doing for this community, and wondered if I could treat you to a Starbucks or whatever it was. And so we called these 7 people. I remember the first person we talked to, his name was Jesse. Jesse was 21 years old, and I remember so well this entire conversation. I had no idea if this would work. I had no clue. Something brand new. So I sat down. We were at a Starbucks. I bought him a lemonade, and we started talking about the church and getting to know each other a little bit and going through that sheet, but it's very conversational. You don't say, here's the 7 points of da-da-da-da-da-da. You get to know them. You talk about something. Let them respond to what you're talking about. You want to hear their feedback. You know, we're thinking about doing this because the community's greatest need is this. What do you think about that? Oh, man, that makes total sense, or whatever they say. So get their feedback and stuff. And I found out that Jesse was very, very talented. He was an artist. He won the Seattle Film Festival already at 21. The guy was amazing. And so I just decided to ask him. I said, you know, Jesse, God's really blessed you with a lot of talents. Would you ever consider using those talents to glorify God and help us build a church? And he was very stone-faced, couldn't read him at all. And then he said, you have my life. And I get chills every time I say it, even today after I've said it hundreds of times. And I was shocked, actually. I was like, what? I literally said that. I was like, what? And he said it again. You have my life.
Amen. That's commitment.
And he wasn't joking.
You were making sure you said life, not what.
He wasn't married, so. But he ended up quitting his job and got another job so he'd have more free time. Spent 40 hours a week at least volunteering with us to help us get this thing started. I trained him how to do to do these interviews, so I didn't have to do them all myself. He ended up being the guy that I told you started the prayer group in his house. That was him. It was such a powerful prayer group. He and his wife, who was just a girlfriend at the time, in fact, that's a crazy story too. He was planning, he told us later, I was planning to leave Christianity. He was raised an Adventist. Nobody had ever asked him to help. And some of his friends had become Wiccans. So he was going to become a Wiccan and join them in this, because at least, there's some community there and stuff. And so his life began changing rapidly as he began helping us, serving. And when we get somebody in our core team, we begin discipling them immediately. His girlfriend started freaking out that he was changing so fast, but freaking out in a good way because she couldn't believe the positive changes in his life. And he kept talking about this pastor that's working with me, and she had extreme social anxiety. So he finally said, my girlfriend wants to meet you. And so we met at a different Starbucks, and I remember so well this encounter. It was so strange. I was talking to her, and so I'd be sitting there. She sat turned away from me in the fetal position. And wouldn't look at me and just answered things. It was really unusual because she was terrified because I was a pastor. She didn't have a church background. She had social anxiety problems. But quickly we became friends. And later I was able to baptize her in the ocean. One of my favorite pictures of all time is her. When she came out of the ocean, she just jutted her arms out like pure joy and victory. It was beautiful. Those two went on to lead our one of the best youth groups I've ever seen. Then they went on to lead our first new campus out of our campus. And they also led a campus ministry at the University of Washington. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. The conference was so impressed with them. They had nothing after high school education. They hired them as pastors. They're not pastoring still today. They decided their job. They want to be tent maker pastors. So, but just incredible. And so when you do these interviews and you talk about a vision of a church really like Christ would do, it gets people fired up. It's not just to build a core team. You get people passionate about this stuff. And people are always saying, that! I mean, I've had so many people like almost scream at me, that is the church I always wanted. Or other people saying, I just knew there was something missing. I knew it. And now you've put into words something that's been missing in me all the time in church. And so you do this when you're doing these interviews, it gets people really pumped up. But you got to be pumped up first. I mean, you got to be excited about giving your life to this community when you're planting a church. It's so important. And so when we talk to Jesse and the other people in that group, then what we do is we ask them 3 questions at the end. And this is only for those who want to join. If we don't want them to join, question 1 changes. Question 1, instead, I say, when we have our grand opening, can I invite you? That's the question. They don't know that I just didn't invite them to the core team. They have no idea.
They're invited.
They're invited. They're just to the grand opening, not to the core team. But then the second question is, I always say this. I say, Satan just heard our conversation. He's listening, and he doesn't like it. Would you please put us on your daily prayer list? Keep us and the church safe. We need all the protection we can get, and God's leading during this whole process. Would you pray for us every day? First question. I totally skipped that. If you want them, I always say this. I really like you, like Jesse. I said, Jesse, I really like you. I think you'd be fantastic on the core team. But I don't make those decisions. The Bible says that God builds his church. I don't build the church. So what I would ask you to do instead is, would you spend a week of prayer in this, asking God if it's okay for you to be part of this? If he leads you somewhere else, we'll praise God with you. But if he doesn't send you in a different direction and you want to be part of this, then when I call you back in a week, then we would love to have you as part of this core team. And we've explained what's required as part of the core team in that interview process. Second thing, of course, is pray for us. The third thing is how we grow our teams. The third thing we say is this. I say, listen, I don't know people here. I'm new here. I have a passion to reach this community, but there's no way we can do it with the people I know. You've heard now what kind of church this is going to be. And I know that you probably know some people that would be excited about this kind of church. We're never going to pressure them, but we need to share this information to see if they're interested or maybe they know somebody else. So do me a favor, pull out your phone. Let's go through that list now and see who you know that you think would be excited about this. You got to do it right then. You got to get the names then, or only a quarter of the people who say they're going to give you names ever will.
Truth.
Do it now. Do it early. And some people will say, well, I really should call my friends first.
Nope.
And if they're persistent on that, I say this. I say, well, you remember how I called you? Did you feel pressured in any way to come here today? Have I pressured you to join us? I will do the same with your friends, I promise. Yep. But if they still feel uneasy, I'm saying that's no problem. Yep. Let's go through that list and see which friends you're going to call tonight. Still get that list. You just don't get their contact information. Then you can call them back and find out in a day or two if their friends are willing to talk. So it's very important. This is how you're going to grow the church. That's how I went into Seattle, and within a little over 4 months, we went from knowing nobody to having a core team of over 70 people. We had a core team of 77 people. So, and then about 5 months after that, we launched a church at 217 people. This worked. It's worked around the world. If you follow the process, it is very, very effective. You don't have to know people to build an effective, strong core team. You just have to be able to ask, who do you know? And if you share the vision right, they're going to give you names. But, you might mess up. That happens. We all make mistakes. But you'll learn. And I can't tell you that there's an easy way. This is exactly how you do it. Because every interview is different. I don't have set questions because people are different. And the conversations go differently. It's like Bible studies. The first time you give Bible studies, you're kind of very rigid. You're following this format. You're going one after another. Ask the questions. But once you get experienced in giving Bible studies, then it becomes much more personal for those you're studying with. You're listening to their questions. You're adapting the study for the person. That'll happen when you're doing the interviews. Once you do enough of these, you get to 10 or 12, 15 of these, you're going to be a pro at this. And you'll know exactly what questions. Now, there's some red flags I look for. The biggest red flag I get is when they ask questions like, what kind of music are you going to have?
All right.
I always respond this way. Why do you ask? Because they may have a really good reason for asking that. But if they say, well, I only like contemporary music, and I don't want to go to a church that does, no. I don't care if we are doing contemporary music. It's no. Because that's a consumer. I may invite them to our grand opening, but they're not going to be part of the core team. They don't get it. Even though I've explained it to them about the next person culture and we're here to serve the community, there's a lot of people who just can't get out of the consumer mindset. That they think that this church plant is there to be better for them than their last church. We're not planting it for Adventists. Adventists are planting it for non-Adventists. That's what we're doing. And some non-Adventists are planting it for non-Adventists. So the names, I never ask people for names of Adventists. I say, who do you know that would be excited about this? I get a lot of non-Adventist names. We have had, in our core team, we've had a Muslim and an atheist and many other Christian denominations on our core team. Praise God. Amen. I am so glad to have them. I am so glad to have them. Again, this is a missionary field. Yep. Planting churches is just like a missionary field. I know what's going to happen with those people.
Yep.
They know that we're planting an Adventist church. They've heard me talk about it in the interview process. We are not hiding anything. But they are so excited about the mission to the community that people will join who are not Adventists. And guess what? They will become Adventists. Most of them do. If they're willing to join a core team, it's because they're hungry. They're hungry. Listen, I am very radical about this. Like, I won't even use Adventist musicians. I hire non-Adventist musicians.
Wow.
Really dirt cheap, because I know that we will convert them. That is, for me, my personal ministry. I know how to convert musicians. And so I always hire right away. Even if I have great singers like you wouldn't be singing in our church.
Okay.
Maybe once in a while, helping out. But we would hire non-Adventists because I meet with my worship teams every month. And we go through my sermons that's going to be coming up. And I explain the sermon exactly, and explain how they're going to interact with the congregation.
Wow.
And what they don't know is the whole time I've been giving them a Bible study.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So they have no idea that that's what we're doing. You know, we hired a guy that was a player for T.D. Jakes on his worship team. And very well known, well respected. He does scores for movies. You know, very well, does very good. We hired him and his entire worship band for $200 a week.
Whoa. No way.
Yes.
Whoa.
How did we do that? I went and I started searching for churches on Sundays, looking for teams, looking for specific teams. And I talked to them, I'd say, would you like to be paid to practice? And they're like, what? Yeah, would you like to be paid to practice? And they're like, I guess. Well, if you come on Saturday morning, you can do the music, you know, you can do music in Saturday morning, and it'll be like a practice for your Sunday. Then they don't realize that pretty soon I'm setting the agenda for Sunday church. Because when they're meeting with me on the monthly thing, the Sunday pastors aren't doing this. I'm going very specifically over our sermons and what kind of music is going to tie into that. And so I'm picking the music then for Sunday church, because they usually leave it up to them. And so we have these really highly respected people in the music industry coming to our churches. And we had, you know, it's funny because I can't remember how many months in, maybe 9 to 12 months, somewhere in that range. He was our worship leader. He came up to me and he said, I quit the Sunday church. And that was his main income. And I was like, why? And he's like, I'm listening to you preach, and then I listen to them preach, and they are not teaching the truth. And I can't keep leading music in a church that's not teaching truth.
Wow. Amen.
And then they brought in a worship leader, another guy. They were going on vacation. They said, we know another guy. Brought him in, and he, of all of the people, he was the first one baptized. The one that they brought in.
Wow.
You know, so, I mean, we want to reach out to people who are not Adventists. It is perfectly fine to, now you're not going to make them your Sabbath school leader. You're not going to put them in those kind of roles, but there's a lot of things that people could do in a core team that sets the culture of the church without having to be the main teachers of the church. Does that make sense?
That's so radical.
That's awesome.
All right, questions? Any questions? Yes.
I have two questions. So I guess I'm going to ask the second one and then the first one.
Okay.
So you said that you know, we don't put them in, you know, that kind of leadership positions where they teach, right?
Right.
What kind of work can you give to them?
Anything but teaching. Greeting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything wrong with having a non-Adventist greeter? No. I even put them in worship team because I train them how to worship lead. Because that actually is a teaching position, but I teach them. I'll be honest, I don't want to freak you guys out, but my second church plant, my adult Sabbath school leader was a Nazarene. When I left that church, I put him in charge of the church. A Nazarene was running the Adventist church. He quickly was baptized as an Adventist, though. I mean, I knew he believed it all, he just hadn't been baptized yet. So those things are, it's a very simple process. We like to think that we're up here and everybody else is down here. He was way more knowledgeable than any of the other Adventists about the Bible in our church. And so I wanted somebody who knew the Bible better than anybody teaching people. He was a preacher's son, and he was, I mean, once we taught him what we believed, he's like, man, that makes perfect sense. So, yeah, so there's a lot of roles you can have in a church. Potluck, you know, there's a lot of things you can do in a church. Whatever the ministry needs are in the community, people can meet those needs.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so the second question was, you know, you mentioned that the core group should be in between 35, or not should be, but I guess you should aim to 35 to 50. So
we're actually going to go over that in the next one. I thought it was this one, but it's the next one.
Okay.
But let me explain why I do that. I believe that size is important in your church plant. When you start small, you have a lot less impact on the needs of the community. If you start a small church plant, you have 15 to 20 people doing all the work, all the ministries. And so they're so busy doing the worship service, they don't have the bandwidth then to go out and do the need impact for the community, the things that we need to do outside of just worship service. You don't have people helping you make disciples. I mean, they're so wrapped up in the service. And that's how most church plants start, is very small, and the people are doing everything they can to make the service go. For me, the service is the last thing I worry about. I honestly, we'll learn more about this tomorrow, but you will grow a church faster before you have services than after you do.
So true.
Wow.
You will grow much faster before you have services than after. Once you have a service, it distracts you from the work you're doing. Now we'll have tweaks on how to make the service also mission, but yeah. I don't know if I can have enough time to explain that in the depth I'd like to.
My experience is 100% true. That's 100% true.
Wow.
Yes, sir. Do you have one of the mics? Oh, here it is. Here's one. Here it is.
Do you have problems with colleagues when you are interviewing their members?
So I don't ask.
Do you talk with them, or?
So I do several things with colleagues, but every church plant is different. So like when I planted my church in Lincoln, Nebraska, with a heavy Adventist population there, I went to the area churches and I said, these are the things I'm going to be doing, and a lot of your members are going to want to come to my church. I don't want them. So let me help you develop these ministries, or you develop those ministries stronger, so that there won't be an appeal for them to go from your church to my church. Because I'm not looking to just get a bunch of sheep flocking in. So that's one thing I did there. But in Seattle, we had one church where we transferred out, and I'm not exactly, if I remember, it was like 27 young adults transferred out of their church in one Sabbath. I mean, because we had our signing for our company or whatever it is. And so we had all of these young adults transfer out of the church close to us. And the pastor was furious. And he's like, they're not even evangelistic. They're just stealing our people. So we brought the list to him of everybody who came in. I can't remember how many, 140 maybe it was, or whatever it was. And I said, I want you to go through that list and you pick out your people. He could only identify 2. Because the rest were not going to church. He didn't even know them. We were winning back a ton of Adventists. And church plants, usually about 1/3 of my churches are former Adventists coming back.
That's so true.
Church plants attract the former Adventists back in. And so that was something that he didn't expect. But it opened his eyes, and to his credit, then he let us help him develop a young adult ministry that's thriving, and his church grew dramatically from it. So, yeah, we're not in competition, though. We want to help people. Yeah.
So you said that that it starts getting complicated when you have the services, or you start losing people, or so.
No, you lose momentum.
You lose momentum. So what are you doing prior to having services? Are you
Tomorrow
just
you're going to learn all about
Okay,
it.
all right.
Yeah. The whole day is about tomorrow. Is about that. Yeah. Yes.
So would you ever want to stop having services and
No.
start over? Okay, once you start services, just keep it. Okay.
Yeah, and usually when you start services, it's the right time to start. If you wait too long to have services, you also lose momentum. So you're always leading towards doing something for the public and the community. But if you don't do it soon enough, then people are like, what are we doing? We're just a club learning with each other. So there is a timing for both. Yeah. Good. Yes.
I mean, I haven't gone into detail on this, but so what you're saying basically with all this is you build your core team first, you know, and then the grand opening is basically the regular service.
Yes, that's the first regular service.
Right.
For the public.
For the public. So, but you start working with the core group a few months ago before that.
Yeah, at least 6, but probably more like 7 or 8.
Oh, it was the sequence that you presented there, right?
Yeah, the 5-month pre-launch is part of that. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll answer all your question on that. You're way ahead of me, but tomorrow we'll catch you up. All right, one more question, then we need to get to our groups, and then we'll be done. Any other questions? Okay, good. All right, so please get into your groups. You'll see that you have a longer one this time. You have 9 minutes for this one. Please read this one carefully.